Ashley was always called Sunshine. From the moment she was born, the little girl seemed to light up everything around her. When she was brought from the hospital, put on the table and unwrapped diapers, the many neighbors who had gathered for the event in their house, amicably aghast. Unexpectedly, they laughed. The baby, lying in front of them and amusingly moving freed arms and legs, as if glowing. The baby's light skin was covered with light, barely visible freckles, making her less white. "Oh, what if it's a disease?" Olivia, the girl's mother, exclaimed hysterically. "It's a rash, probably. How could they let you out of the hospital with such a disease?" "Olivia, stop screaming, you'll scare the child." The woman was shouted down firmly by the stately Emily, a mother of 5. Because of this, she was considered infallible in matters of health and education. "It's not a rash." She scrutinized the baby. "They're freckles. Your little redhead's like a dandelion." Emily was restrained in her emotions, but she smiled involuntarily, and the others smiled after her. The little girl, 5 days old, felt everyone's delight. Her eyes rounded, and her funny, wrinkled nose, as only babies can do, sneezed. On the top of her head, a strand of bright red hair tangled amusingly. On her temples and the back of her head, golden locks curled into amusing curls. Golden eyebrows and eyelashes completed the picture. "Well, just a sunshine," someone whispered admiringly. "A sunny little girl." But only she got a bad mother came a low voice from behind. A short, thin woman of about 50 strode resolutely through the crowd. Her thin hands, calloused from hard labor, deftly grabbed the little girl. "You're all whispering and grumbling," she said. "Come on, get out of here. There's nothing to frighten the child or jinx it." "Come on," Barbara Emily said conciliatingly. The others admired the baby in silence, only sighing occasionally. "It's worth it to see such a miracle. We seldom have anything that isn't dark as coal. And here is such a sunshine," laughed the other one quietly. "That's just it," Barbara said angrily, shooing her neighbors away from the table. "Go home, all of you, or I'll take a broom, and I'll spare your gray heads." Knowing her decisive temper and the fact that she was not used to throwing words around, the women started to leave. Barbara locked the door and turned to the mother of the little girl, who had been sitting in silence all this time. "Well, daughter, tell me, how are we going to live from now on?" She shrugged her shoulders. "As we lived before, so we will continue to live." "No," the mother replied resolutely. "You have a child now. You will not live as before." "You don't tell me how to live," replied the daughter angrily. "Can you do it without me?" Barbara hesitated. "There's your showdown lying there, waving its arms and legs." She waved her hand in the direction of the little girl, who was concentrating on her fingers. At the sight of the girl, her mother's angry, tense face instantly relaxed and blossomed. The deep wrinkles turned into rays that scattered to the sides. She approached the little girl and gently touched her tiny hands. The girl immediately grasped her grandmother's finger tightly. Barbara laughed softly and leaned toward her granddaughter, scrutinizing her. Her eyes lit up with tenderness. "And she is a sunshine," she said with a soft smile. "Our golden daughter." "A redhead like her father," she said sharply. "You can't find a golden one." These words brought Barbara back to reality. Barbara looked sharply at her daughter. Her face was hard and stern again, and her gaze was testing and distrustful. "I'm not going to discuss your affairs. It's none of my business. But you brought your child into my home, and it's my granddaughter," she emphasized the last 2 words. "Olivia, your daughter is your life now. And how are you going to live it? It's our business. It's mine too. So don't you dare talk to me like that. This is my home for now, and I own it." "I knew it," Olivia said, gloatingly. "I know that you'd reproach me for being your keeper." Barbara looked at Olivia regretfully and waved her hand tiredly. "Come to the child, mother," she said. "Why should I go near her?" Her daughter shrugged her shoulder. "She's not crying. So everything is normal." And so it turned out that all the care of the baby fell on the shoulders and hands of 55-year-old Barbara. Barbara was a very famous and notable person in the big noisy village. The girl is short and thin. Nevertheless, she never got lost in the crowd of her peers. Her large brown eyes, thick blonde braid, and cheerful, never dull character made up for her lack of height and stature. She was beautiful with a special, calm, sweet beauty, and modestly dressed, always busy with an inordinate number of younger brothers and sisters, always freckled in bunches. Barbara never had a shortage of suitors. After graduating from teacher training institutes, Barbara returned to her native village and began working as a math teacher in the only school. A few years later, Barbara, who by then had blossomed into a lush, truly feminine beauty, to everyone's amazement and indignation, married a stranger. A stranger, as they called him in the village. Alex came from the city to work as a technician at a large livestock complex, and according to the village critics, other than a diploma in his profession, there was nothing outstanding about him. Barbara and Alex loved each other very much. It was obvious to the naked eye, and their love was something unusual for these places, not country. Alex gave his wife bouquets of flowers, carried her bags from stores, and carried her through puddles on his hands, which made men indignant, and women in a timid awe. Barbara wasted her hands washing his shirts by hand and rushing home from school in time to prepare a delicious dinner. Crazy people. What can you take from them? Waved at them and left the young family in peace. A year later, they had a daughter who was named Olivia. And when the girl was 7 years old, Alex was not. He died horribly and ridiculously. On a winter's evening, he was working late. His car froze. Waiting for a hitchhiker was hopeless, and Alex, without warning anyone, decided to walk home. 3 kilometers, separating the complex from the village, did not seem to him a great distance, but in an hour he would see his beloved wife and daughter. The night was not only frosty but also overcast, and Alex, a city man, quickly lost his way and went in a completely different direction. In general, Alex froze in the field, and the thick snow covered all his tracks. They searched for him for several days, when no one but Barbara had any hope. She believed to the last, believed in a miracle. But it wasn't until spring, when Alex's body was found, that she calmed down. After burying Alex, Barbara became a different person. It seemed that together with her husband, she put in the coffin of her joy, cheer, and laughter. She became withdrawn and taciturn, shutting herself away. The only place where one could see the old Barbara was at school. With children, she remained kind, patient, and fair. About new relationships after Alex's death, Barbara did not even think about. Local men tried to get close to her, to befriend her, to court her, and even, according to village tradition, to openly woo her. Barbara for many years remained a beautiful young woman with a straight back, a swift gait. But to all attempts to marry her, she answered with a firm refusal. She kicked matchmakers out of the house and sent suitors away. So she lived alone with her daughter Olivia, without asking for help, without complaining about fate. No one saw her tears. Gradually, everyone got used to the fact that she was a lonely, independent, and adamant woman, the eternal widow of her Alex. Olivia was growing up, different from the cheerful and smiling Barbara they remembered her as. It was probably Barbara's fault in many ways that Olivia grew up withdrawn and too serious for a girl. Her seriousness was sullen and directed at people rather than her studies. Almost never did Olivia smile, and no one could hear her laugh. At school, she had a reputation as a savage and a damsel with oddities. Her mother, even though they had no one else, was indifferent to her, showing little affection. There was no intimacy between them, the usual intimacy between a mother and her only daughter. Olivia had always kept a distance between herself and Barbara, and no one, including Barbara herself, was surprised that when she'd barely graduated from high school, Olivia had gone to the city without any special plans. All those years while Olivia was growing up, Barbara had been tormented with guilt toward her daughter. She realized that she didn't like Olivia, didn't give her warmth and tenderness, that all that care about Olivia, delicious food and beautiful clothes. Checking her lessons, it was all very important, of course, but it wasn't the main thing in the relationship between a daughter and her mother. What was the issue here? Was it that her feelings had died with Alex and she'd never been able to rekindle them for her daughter's sake? Or was it that Olivia was growing up too independent and didn't seem to need her mother at all? It probably didn't matter anymore. Olivia, I have a favor to ask of you. Barbara finally made up her mind and began a very difficult conversation with her daughter before she left home. I'm sorry to you, she said, and stopped talking when she looked up and saw the ironic look in Olivia's eyes. What is it, Mom? She said with a chuckle. Let's not do that. Thank God you haven't bullied me all these years or burdened me with errands. And now let's do without playing mother-daughter. Well, what did you want to say? She continued to look at the confused mother with a grin. Behave, study. Try not to get knocked up by the first guy you meet. I don't think I missed anything. Oh yes, and most importantly, my dear daughter. I love you very much and I'm always here for you, no matter what happens. So Barbara, having listened to her daughter's tirade, closed her eyes and took a breath. Well, I guess I deserve it, she said quietly and humbly. I love you very much, and I am always ready to help you in any way I can. She added, almost in a whisper, no matter what happens. Olivia went to the city and rarely heard from him. She enrolled in a trade school, and after graduation she found a job with a trading firm. She did not stay long in the city, however, and returned home. Barbara was immensely happy about the return of her daughter, her hedgehog, as she called Olivia to herself. But the hedgehog had become even more prickly in the 4 years she had been away from her mother. But Mom, what's there to tell? She finally answered her mother's questions. My city life didn't work out. Not everyone has to walk on asphalt in heels. Some people need to knead manure with their elbows. Olivia, of course, strongly exaggerated, so disparagingly talking about her small homeland, a village on the outskirts of which a huge cattle breeding complex was constantly growing and expanding. Due to this, in terms of living standards, livability, and size, it had long been not inferior to a small town. For some reason, Olivia was even a little offended by Barbara, who sincerely loved the place where she had lived almost all her life. It's nice here, Barbara said. We don't even have that manure lying around the barns. And there is a lot of work, including in your specialty. And we recently got gas, and they built a movie theater. Yes, and birch trees, a river, and so on. We have everything. Olivia ended the conversation decisively. They were back to being mother and daughter. Barbara continued to work at her school, graduating new generations of students. Olivia, an accountant by training, went to work at the cattle farm. But work, like everything else in her life, did not interest her. She remained unsociable. In their house for a long time settled silence and despondency. And then, a few years later, Olivia suddenly changed. She began to stare at her reflection in the mirror for long periods of time, something she had never done before. And she didn't like what she saw. Mom, Olivia suddenly came out of her room one evening and spoke to her mother. Maybe I should get a haircut. What do you think? Barbara dropped the TV remote in surprise. Not only was it unexpected that Olivia would ask her to do something like that, but it was also a question of appearance. Olivia had little interest in how she looked. Barbara looked at her daughter, whose hair, long unwashed and overgrown, was twisted at the back of her head in a sloppy bun. And a daughter, Barbara said with her hands. Of course, that would be wonderful. She struggled to keep from asking why her daughter was paying attention to her appearance. The reason, however, soon became clear. Andrew's mom works at the mill, Olivia said. And, we've decided to get married. He doesn't have a place to live with me, of course. She was silent, waiting for her mother's reaction. Barbara sat down on the edge of her chair and tried to cope with the shock of her daughter's categorical statements. But why didn't you say so in the first place? She asked. If that's what you've decided, it's just that it's all so sudden. Why unexpected? Smirked ironically at her daughter. Don't forget, I'm almost 30 years old. How is that unexpected? I mean, I've never even met your man. I don't even know his name, Barbara said, a little pathetically. What's there to see? He's just a man, an ordinary man. And his name was Andrew. Wait, Olivia. Barbara raised her hand and pressed it to her cheek, looking at her daughter fearfully. Are you pregnant by any chance? Well, yes, I am, Olivia hummed. After spending the night without sleep, Barbara got up, determined. Well, Olivia, if that's the way it's going to be, bring your chosen one. Well, will you bear me a grandson or granddaughter? And we'll live again as a big, friendly, normal family, she said, emphasizing the word normal. However, a normal, and even more so a friendly family did not happen again. It wasn't in Andrew's plans to start a family or to have a child. He was not a local and came to the mill for seasonal work, for which there was a shortage of laborers. The soft-spoken, uncommunicative, aloof Andrew and Olivia, who was a stranger to the place, was the bookkeeper. She was perfect for a casual, easy relationship. Especially since, for all her unsociability, Olivia was not spoiled by male attention. Quite handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with curly hair and a charming smile, Andrew was certainly attractive. A few simple compliments and signs of attention were enough for Olivia to give in to his advances. After realizing she was pregnant, Olivia decided that here was her chance to finally be a normal woman. In her position, all mothers are. For some reason, she was hesitant to tell Andrew about her situation. Meanwhile, Andrew's contract with the mill was coming to an end, and it was time for him to leave. When Olivia told him she was pregnant, 4 months pregnant, Andrew became angry. "What are you, an idiot?" he exploded. "What family? What baby? Don't you know what you should have done if you turned out to be so stupid? Look at yourself in the mirror, bride," he shouted angrily. "I've got 2 like you at every station." "No," he corrected himself. "There are no more like you. The rest of them are prettier somehow. But did you imagine I'd stay here with you and those cockroaches? No, you're really crazy." And so Olivia's slim hope for happiness was shattered. "Olivia, where is your boyfriend?" Barbara asked timidly a few weeks after her memorable conversation with her daughter. Olivia was back to her way of life. She sat unkempt, wearing an old tracksuit and biting her fingernail. The only thing new about her appearance was her belly, which was already quite noticeable. Olivia always wore loose uniforms, though, and no one but her mother knew about her situation. "Fiancé?" She grinned back. "The hell he knows, he's gone to look for another bride." "What do you mean?" Barbara sat down. It seemed to her that she was ready for everything, and her daughter couldn't surprise her. But as it turned out, she was wrong. The new news had hit her like a snowball. "Olivia, how could it be?" Yes, just like that, Olivia jumped up from the chair she'd just been sitting in, leaning against the wall. "Don't start lecturing me, okay? I'm sick of it." "What are you gonna do?" What? Get rid of it? I don't know how. They say it's a long time coming." "What are you talking about?" Barbara, too, got up impulsively and paced the room excitedly. "How can you get rid of your child, my daughter? It's a sin." She made a firm gesture to stop Olivia, who was obviously going to object, and her daughter, surprised by her mother's excitement, remained silent for some reason. "Have the baby," Barbara said heartily, but firmly. And as if stamping her decision, she even banged her fist on the table. We'll raise her. If you don't want to have a baby for yourself, at least have one for me, girl," she added quietly. Olivia shrugged and left the room. 5 months later, a girl was born with bright red hair and wonderful doll-like eyes. The eyes were an amazing gray-blue color. And this color was determined in the baby literally from the first days, and did not change anymore. "What shall we call her?" Barbara asked her daughter. Olivia shrugged. "Ashley." Barbara chanted one of her favorite names. "Ashley it is," Olivia agreed indifferently. The women in the village were treated differently by their strange, atypical family of 3 generations. Some shrugged indifferently, others with obvious incomprehension, but most were sympathetic. Everyone knew Barbara from childhood, remembered how tragically her family life successfully started, how absurd her relationship with her only daughter turned out to be. Missed Olivia because of her grief. The townspeople sighed and smiled involuntarily. But Ashley, it seems, was given to Barbara as a reward. The townspeople added in conversation among themselves. Barbara blossomed again. With the birth of her granddaughter, she, as if she had been mothballed for years, opened up again, studied, learned to smile. Olivia, seeing how her mother had completely dissolved into Ashley, was visibly relieved that she had completely shifted the care of the girl to her, and as if she had forgotten about her daughter. And so it turned out that at the age of 2, Ashley's real mom became her grandmother. "Don't you dare reproach me." Olivia cut her mother off when she tried to talk about Ashley needing a mom. "You weren't the perfect mom yourself, and that's okay. I grew up, and Ashley will grow up just as well as anyone else." Ashley didn't just grow up to be perfect. The girl was some kind of amazing creature. Clear eyes with a round face and a face thickly studded with golden short fuzz. She seemed to be smiling all the time. Even if the girl's lips were compressed, their corners were still raised, and the feeling of a quiet and sly smile did not leave the one who looked at her face. But if the little girl laughed with her shining white teeth, it was impossible not to smile back. The girl grew really pretty, a little snub nose, gray-blue eyes, plump lips, very light, as most redheads' skin. All this promised that the girl would grow up, if not beautiful, then certainly very pretty. But the main adornment of the girl was her hair, not flashy but bright. The red color of her hair was as if slightly accentuated by a light, strong shade. At the same time, the hair glistened and shimmered, as if there were elusive lights running through it. Like many children, her hair was tangled, and when it was time to cut her hair, Barbara looked at her granddaughter and sighed as she put the scissors aside, unable to do the deed. "Well, I cannot," she confessed to her neighbor. "Can you imagine? I can't lift my hand, I can't even cry. It's funny and sinful. You won't believe it. I sit and cry. And I realize that this hair is getting in the way, tangled in it. And I still can't pull myself together." In accordance with the hair, Ashley's character was also, as they say, golden. The girl was very active and mobile, liked to invent mischievous adventures, but at the same time was obedient and manageable. In her, there was not a hint of closeness and sullenness, which from childhood distinguished her mother. Ashley was a mocking and cheerful girl, ringing with silvery laughter every chance she got. What a sparkler, said the kindergarten teacher, where Barbara gave Ashley to when she was 2.5 years old. She herself continued to work at the school. Ashley grew from an adorable baby to an equally adorable girl. Her good fortune had passed all the skin problems and torment that spoiled the lives of so many teenagers. Her loosely curly hair remained her jewelry. At 13 to 14 years on Ashley, as she, not particularly wise, called in school, slowly looked at most of the boys' peers. True, in adolescence, sympathy is sometimes expressed in a very strange way. On a fall afternoon, Ashley, a sixth grader on the second shift, was carefully carrying a model of a building in her outstretched arms. It was the fruit of days of painstaking work in the evenings. Ashley had assembled it out of paper, matches, paper clips, and more, always thinking of new things to add. "Well, Ashley," she spun around. Barbara laughed. "What's that you've got there?" "This, Grandma, is the house of the future," proudly declared the girl. "And, well, if the future, then of course," said the grandmother respectfully, looking at the tiered construction of the parts, which were fastened in some intricate way. Finally, the intricate layout was ready, and so Ashley, carefully wrapping her precious pyramid around her arms, carefully but quickly stepped towards the school. "Hey, redhead," she heard behind her. "Ashley, why can't you hear me? I'm asking you." The girl stopped and, carefully afraid of dropping her precious cargo, looked back. She did. Standing behind her, smirking, was Justin, a boy from her class. A pretty obnoxious kid. Loved bullying, unless it was guaranteed to be seen by an adult. Justin and Ashley had run into this boy on various occasions, mostly trying to stop another boy's antics. Behind him, the faces of two more of Justin's boyfriends could be seen. Ashley sighed. Justin was a coward, and in another situation Ashley would have no trouble dealing with him, as she had done so many times. But right now she couldn't risk it. She needed to get her layout to school, which she was pretty sure she would win the school competition with. After all, she began in a very calm voice and a friendly smile. "Stay out of this. Please, I don't have time." No time for her. "Look, what's that you've got there?" "Guys, let's go see what she's dragging around." Ashley, in a last-ditch effort to protect her man-made marvel, turned her back to them and put her elbows out. But it didn't help her, of course. Justin shoved Ashley hard in the back, and one of the accomplices slapped his arms. The layout swayed, and as if sadly nodded one last time to its creator, and collapsed into the fall mud. Tears of indignation instantly filled Ashley's eyes and spurted from them. But she didn't smear them on her face. Ashley lunged at her abusers and grabbed the sleeve of her main abuser, Justin. Of course he would be in trouble, but there were 3 boys. There was no telling how the story would have ended for Ashley if there hadn't been a loud shout over their heads. "Come on, kids." They froze. At that, 2 of the boys were grabbed by the collars like kittens by the scruff of their necks. Justin, who was held only by Ashley, looked up and, instantly recognizing the situation, yanked his sleeve from Ashley's fingers and sprinted down the alley as fast as he could. His buddies, suddenly feeling free, followed. "If I see you again, I'll have you on crutches," came their way. Ashley stared at her masterpiece of future architecture. It had fallen apart from the impact with the ground, and the fall mud had already soaked the paper parts and turned them into mush. The girl squatted down and, sighing bitterly, began to collect the remains of the model. Tears rolled out of her eyes and hung ridiculously on her nose. Out of frustration, or rather grief, which was the biggest one so far in her short life. She didn't even immediately remember her unexpected savior. She looked up and met his eyes with a look quite grown up. Standing in front of her was a boy with shaggy blonde hair and a very serious face for a 15-year-old boy. Of course, Ashley knew this boy, as the whole school knew him. His name was Christopher. He was in 9th grade and was the school celebrity. Almost straight A student, captain of the school basketball team. He was the best at computers, already knew how to drive a car, owned a huge German Shepherd, and generally had such an unimaginable set of cool qualities that he seemed like a Superman against the background of his peers, and even those who were older than him. Among other things, Christopher was very handsome, and sports made his figure strong and broad-shouldered, and taught beyond his years. And here was this almost superhuman man now standing over Ashley and looking at her distress. At last he came up and bent to the ground with evident interest. "What have you got there?" he asked. "It's a model of a building of the future." "Well, you know, we have a contest for 6th graders. Well, I wanted to participate so badly. I spent almost a month making it." She was surprised by the guy's interest in the model. "By yourself?" he questioned with disbelief. "By myself, really?" Ashley widened her eyes even more, making them look huge. "Well, my grandmother helped me. 2 roses, but not much. Don't worry, I did most of it myself." "That's great," Christopher said, suddenly delighted. Ashley suddenly remembered her misfortune and tears came to her eyes again. She angrily wiped her face and finally remembered what was important. "Oh, I didn't thank you for driving them away. Help me out. Except it's too late." "Nothing's too late," he declared. "Look at that, 3 pieces almost unharmed." Christopher spoke, carefully shifting the parts onto dry leaves. "This one here, I don't know what you've got. You'll have to completely redo them, of course, but you remember how you glued them together. And these 2 things here, but it's just a matter of replacing a few things. No problem at all." And Christopher suddenly smiled at the girl. "Thanks," Ashley said, confused. "Except I probably won't make it in time anyway. The competition is the day after tomorrow." "You'll make it if you want to," said the savior emphatically. "Your name is Ashley. I believe you're Barbara's granddaughter, right?" Ashley nodded, looking at Christopher mesmerized. "Look, let's put it this way." He thought for a while. "I don't have practice tonight. I'll come over tonight, if that's okay, and help you out a little. Just help me glue and cut. That doesn't count. The idea is yours." "Can you do that?" Really, Ashley, unable to believe her ears, continued to stare at Christopher with all eyes. "What a pair of eyes you have," the boy suddenly uttered. "All right, Carrot Top. See you later." Christopher was not deceived, and indeed he came to their house in the evening. Christopher Book and Barbara looked at him in surprise. "Hello, Barbara," the boy replied, embarrassed. "And I'm here to see your Ashley." Barbara looked at him in amazement. "Wow." About the meetings, Olivia's voice came from the back of the room. "It's a little early, daughter," Olivia began. "Sheesh," Barbara shouted sharply and turned to the boy and smiled welcomingly. "Come in, please, Christopher." "You've come," Ashley shouted happily, finding herself on the threshold of the room. "Then I'll definitely make it in time." "But I promise," Christopher said solidly. After working together for 3 hours, the layout was even better. And the next day, Christopher, who lived nearby, carried it to school himself, just in case. Ashley won first place in the contest, and Christopher suddenly realized that he was very pleased to help the brave redhead with the extraordinary clear and pure eyes. A couple of days after their chance encounter, Christopher, for some reason I don't know why, looked into the wing of the school where the little ones were studying. By high school girl standards, he saw Ashley immediately among the other 6th graders. Her red hair and 2 pigtails made her stand out in a big way. It was like she was glowing with some kind of joyful light and illuminating everything around her. At least on a rather cloudy day, it seemed to get brighter around the thin girl, as if an invisible ray of sunlight was coming from her herself. Ashley, the boy called out softly, quite unexpectedly. "Oh," Ashley exclaimed, running up to him and hesitantly stopping a few paces away. "Christopher, hello. I'm so glad to see you. How are you doing? Did you win the contest?" In a slightly muffled voice, he asked. He suddenly felt embarrassed for some reason. Christopher Foken, a high school student, one of the informal leaders of the school, had stuck up for the kids and was standing like a fool in front of a funny red-haired girl. Yeah, she won. First place. Can you believe it? She smiled wide across her mouth, and her toothy grin suddenly made it even brighter. Bloody hell, Christopher said angrily to himself. He wasn't quite sure what was happening to him or why he liked looking at Ashley so much. Well, good for you. Okay, come on, he struggled to find the words. He had never gotten lost in front of teachers or peers before. Christopher turned and took a determined step to the side, but stopped suddenly, turned again to the girl who continued to stand and smile enthusiastically, and added, if you have any problems, ask me. At the same time, he cast a very expressive glance in the direction of the group of boys, led by Justin, whose eyes were as rounded as possible. The news that the red-headed Ashley and the 6th grader were now under Christopher's personal protection spread quickly through the school and reached the ears of even the most uncomprehending. Anyway, immediately Justin quickly realized that it was no longer safe to bully a classmate. There certainly couldn't be any friendship between a 6th grader and a 9th grader like Christopher. But he treated Ashley like the little sister he never had, and she accepted his unobtrusive patronage with delight and pride. They met periodically at school or on the street. Ashley invariably repaid the favor with a cheerful smile. Christopher just couldn't help but smile back. For some reason, the sight of Ashley's red head always lifted Christopher's spirits. And all the things he had planned for the day worked out just fine. He had come to regard the girl as his personal talisman. It got to the point that when he didn't see Ashley at school before his final essay, he ran to her house with 2 red, ruddy apples as a distraction. After graduating from high school, Christopher, after serving in the army, went to the city to attend technical school. After receiving his diploma, he tried to live and work in the city. But local life was not for him. He was always drawn back home, to his native village, to his mother, friends, loved ones, streets and river banks familiar to the smallest details, old and explored by him from top to bottom and from bottom to top trees, and something else that he could neither understand nor formulate. 3 years later, in the spring, he returned home. Christopher walked down the street, breathing in the fresh air filled with the smells of cherry blossoms and lilacs. He listened to the birds singing and felt idiotically, inexplicably happy. The wicket slammed ahead. It was Barbara's house. A slim, girlish figure dressed in skinny jeans and a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows easily jumped out of the gate. With her back to Christopher, she raised her arms, yanked the hairband from her hair, and her shiny red hair cascaded down her back, backlit by the bright spring sun. It was as if they were creating a glow around the girl. Christopher stopped, utterly amazed. The girl closed the wicket and turned to face him. Her face showed a look of surprise mixed with joy. Her eyebrows crept upward, and he was finally blinded. She flashed him a wide smile. "Ashley, you're here," Christopher exclaimed happily, not believing his eyes. "How have you changed?" "I've grown," she laughed, running up to him. "How do you do?" She held out her narrow palm to him, and he shook it with a kind of awe. The girl seemed to him extraordinary, incredible. More importantly, he realized why he'd missed her all these years. The red-haired Ashley, his mentee, who had grown into a hot bird. "Christopher, can you even hear me?" He finally heard Ashley laugh. She'd been saying something to him for a couple minutes, and he'd been standing in the middle of the street, staring at her and not reacting. "What's wrong with me?" He finally came to his senses. "I said, how long are you staying? Is your mom coming to visit on vacation?" No, Ashley, I'm not visiting. I'm home for good." He finally decided to look her in the eye. "What color are they, blue-gray?" "I don't know." In the bright sunlight, they were almost a heavenly blue. But there's a strand of hair on her forehead, and in the shadows it looks pearly gray. "That's great," Ashley exclaimed. "Oh, listen, you should come to our prom." "So what if you're older?" "Everyone knows you and remembers you. Do you know how happy everyone would be to see you? Do you?" He didn't know why he said that. "Would you personally be happy to see me?" "Yes," Ashley answered easily and without a second thought. "I'd be very happy." After the prom, which he'd gone to with half the town, he'd suddenly realized that he loved Ashley with a deep, bright, almost sacred love, and maybe he'd loved her all these years without realizing it, without even remembering that she existed. He simply didn't need anyone else but her. Her eyes, her face densely studded with freckles, and her hair flying with flames. "I love you," he told her a week later. "I'll wait for you as long as I have to, if you want to," he added quietly. Very much I want to, he heard also a very quiet answer. The fact that something important and special was going on between Christopher and Ashley, who had returned home, became clear to everyone very quickly. Potential suitors quickly fell away from Ashley, and Christopher was sadly crossed off the list of the town's first suitors. All they saw was each other. "How could it be?" she said to Christopher. "You've just come back. Things have gotten so wonderful, and you have to break up again." They sat on a bench above the river cliff. He had his arm around her shoulders, and it felt so good. They both wanted it to last forever. Ashley was about to move on to graduate school, and she was anxious about leaving him. "Go," he said firmly, pulling her tighter against him as if he were contradicting his own words, not really wanting to let her go. "Go as you wish, study, and I will visit you often as I can, and you'll come to see me. Well, I mean to your mother, your grandmother, and me." He looked into Ashley's eyes. "I told you," he went on, silently, as if thinking about what he'd said. "I'll wait for you. And then, Ashley, I have to earn you. You'll be studying, and I'll be working and fixing up my mother's house. I can't just fall on Barbara's head with a young wife." He slid off the bench and knelt down in front of Ashley. Looking into her eyes, he noticed her cheeks flushed, emphasizing all her freckles. "With his wife," she whispered. Of course, he took her chin gently and lifted Ashley's face to a low slump. "You'll marry me, won't you?" She nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek. Ashley left to go to school for economics, and Christopher got serious about developing and renovating his parents' old house. They saw each other as often as possible. With each meeting, they were convinced that their feelings were only growing stronger. 3 years passed. Ashley got her degree and moved back home. The moment had finally arrived when she and Christopher could be together truly as man and woman, as husband and wife. Her whole being yearned for it. She wanted it with every fiber of her being, thought about it constantly. And it made it all the harder to hear the news she'd gotten at home. Ashley. Christopher began a conversation for which he had obviously been preparing for a long time. "My girl," he cleared his throat and shook his head stubbornly, continuing in a firm voice, "we need to wait a little longer." "What?" Ashley asked, confused. "Wait for what?" "Well, to get married," Christopher answered confusedly. "You know, Ashley, I'm sorry, I should have consulted you, of course, but it all happened so fast, before I knew it. But Ashley, it's only for a year. And it's money I won't make here in 5 years. You and I are going to make such a living off of it." He kept saying something. She continued to stare at him incomprehensibly, realizing only one thing: he would not marry her. And they were going somewhere apart again. How much longer? She let out something like a sob. "I can't wait any longer. I don't want to." She wrenched her hands from his, jumped up and pushed him with her foot. "Ashley, sweetheart, love," he mumbled, wrapping his arms around Ashley. "I can't and don't want to wait any longer either, but let's just wait a little longer. Please, my love." He hugged her, whispering some words in her ear. All their longing for each other spoke so powerfully that everything was forgotten: the voice of reason, calculations, promises, and propriety. There were only 2 people left in the world, he and she. And they were together. Christopher signed a 1-year contract to serve in the army. He was a fit, healthy, athletic guy, and he was willingly accepted into one of the units that carried out combat missions in a distant African country. Ashley, of course, did not know all the details of the contract, the main thing: the degree of danger to his life. Giving in to persuasion, and most importantly, being somewhere between heaven and earth, after all that finally happened between them, she, of course, agreed to everything. Ashley stayed waiting for Christopher, and 3 months after he left, she realized she was pregnant. Another month later, Christopher came home early. He came back in a zinc coffin. At Christopher's funeral, Ashley, pale and frightened by dizziness, fainted. She woke up at home on her bed with a wet handkerchief on her forehead. Barbara was sitting a little farther away, scrutinizing her granddaughter's face. "How are you?" she asked what seemed to Ashley to be the most stupid and pointless question. Ashley tried to turn away from the wall. "Don't turn away from me, Ashley," she said firmly. "Let's talk." This is, of course, unimaginable grief. "Christopher." Her voice trailed off and she quickly wiped her eyes. "Christopher is such a wonderful young best boy we've ever had. Ridiculous, terribly bitter, but he's a man. And he chose his own path. And that path led him to his death. You must realize that and accept it. and go on your way without Christopher. He's gone." "No, Ashley," she stood up resolutely and tried to pull her hands away from the girl's ears. "To go on her way." Ashley suddenly opened her eyes and jumped up from the bed. "There's no more my way, you know. No. Dead end. A dead end," she sobbed hysterically, cradling her face in her hands. Ashley, my girl Barbara, whose heart was literally breaking at the sight of her granddaughter's grief, put her arm around her shoulders. "Believe me, girl, everything passes and this will pass. Time heals. We have to move on." Ashley lifted her tear-stained face to her grandmother and tried to smile a pathetic, shaky smile. "Grandma, honey, it's not going to go away, okay?" She clutched Barbara to her chest, and her shoulders shook with another attack. With a woman's instinct, with all her experience and selfless, but not very happy life, Barbara immediately realized what was wrong. "My God, when did you have time?" she gasped. She continued to hold Ashley tightly to her and rocked her as if she were a child. The girl gradually calmed down. Her sobs turned to sobs and mumbling. At last Ashley recovered enough to speak more or less clearly. "What are you going to do next?" Grandma asked. "What do you mean?" Ashley asked, puzzled. "Have a baby," she said in an unexpectedly firm voice. "That's right. Good for you, girl. I'll help you." It was getting dark outside the window, and the two women, old and young, sat hugging each other, trying to process the grief or the unintended, unrecognized joy through their tears. Ashley had a baby boy, healthy and so large that petite Ashley had been in a lot of pain during labor. Olivia had continued to live with her mother and Ashley all these years, but she still managed to exist completely separate from her family. She looked at her grandson blankly and said, as if she'd thrown a stone, "It's good that the kid. At least when the time comes, he'll leave someone else, not her." Ashley named her son Jason. The boy was businesslike, solid, always busy with his own little problems. He was like Ashley in character, but in appearance he was becoming more like Christopher every day. Of course, Jason was Ashley's joy, and the only meaning in her life, the anchor that bound her to the present. She'd survived Christopher's death, and the worst months after his funeral only because of the small flame of new life inside her. And even though she had Jason, Ashley was slowly fading away. Skinny as she was literally exhausted. All her brightness was extinguished, faded, exactly as her grandmother Barbara had once been after she'd buried. Chattering, wondering how this family of beautiful, strong women repeated each other's unhappy fate. Jason was 3 years old when Barbara finally couldn't take it anymore. "That's it, Ashley, I can't stand to see you go out like a candle," she suddenly declared to her granddaughter. "I don't want to see you kicked out of the house. Come on, get ready." Ashley looked at her grandmother wildly, not sure what she meant. "What are you looking at me for?" The old woman sank down on her. "You need to get out of here. You need a change of scenery, a change of job, a change of environment. And it's no good going to the cemetery every day." "Are you kicking me out?" Ashley asked quietly. "Yes, if you want, I am," the old teacher said firmly and changed her tone to one of persuasion. "Tanechka, my golden child. It's the right thing to do. It's better this way, believe me, girl. You'll get a job and you'll have a place to live. I've already arranged it. You live, you get distracted. New people, new experiences, new life." Jason came running into the room, and Ashley grabbed the baby and held him to her. "Ashley." Grandma looked at her angrily. "Stop hiding behind Jason. He's not going anywhere. He's going to stay with me for a while. If things go well, will you take Jason back to your house? Or maybe you'll come home. Tanechka, girl, you've got to try living a different life. I never asked you for anything, but now I'm begging you to go." Ashley listened to her grandmother at first with incomprehension, indignation. What was she talking about? Leaving home? Leaving Jason? Had she lost her mind? Her beloved, always so wise, kind, and infinitely patient grandmother. But gradually the bewilderment gave way to reflection. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her grandmother was right. She really needs to change her life completely and understand what to do next, how and for what to live. 6 months later, after much agony and deliberation, Ashley made up her mind and left for the city. She was taken in by an old friend of Barbara's, also a former teacher, who had a small apartment. From the first day, Ashley started looking for a job in her specialty. She called the classifieds, sent her resume. but everywhere she got a polite, but essentially the same response. "Sorry, but we can't offer you this vacancy." She realized that objectively she had little chance. Lack of local registration, relatively little work experience, and a young child in the absence of her husband, all this made her candidacy not very attractive to employers. Even though she had a red diploma in economics from a technical school. She was almost despairing and was thinking of returning home when she got an interview at a rather large, apparently well-known in the city firm for the production and sale of furniture. Well, told her in the Department of Human Resources, the place in our accounting department really was. But just this morning we've decided on another candidate. I'm sorry. Ashley was already habitually upset, but suddenly she decided. But maybe there are other jobs available? I really need a job, you know. The HR lady, who had already risen from her seat, sat back in her chair. Maybe it was Ashley's charm, or maybe anger, pity for the young woman. Either way, she gave Ashley a dubious look and stretched out. "Well, I don't know. I have an opening, of course. But I don't think you'll accept it. We need an office cleaner." Of course, it was a blow to Ashley's ego. She was a country person and respected any labor, including unskilled labor. Take a few years to learn to come to the city and mop the floor, Ashley thought. She even faltered for a second, but shook her head stubbornly. The money she'd taken with her from home was running out, and she had to either take any job or go back home. "I agree." Ashley looked firmly into the HR person's eyes. "When can I go to work?" "You can go to work tomorrow," she replied indifferently. Ashley began to work, and the job itself was not difficult for her. Having been used to labor in the house and vegetable garden since childhood, it didn't seem hard at all. What was discouraging was the attitude of those around her. It was hard for her, accustomed to attention and love, to realize that for others she was an empty place. An appendage to the bucket and mop, who might not even be honored with a simple hello. The office was vast and bustling, with many services and departments. After a while, Ashley remembered by face and by name the managers, leading specialists and ordinary employees, although for them she was still the girl who was asked to clean, move, or wipe something in addition to her duties. A couple of months had passed, and Ashley was getting to know not only the structure, but also some of the company's business. "Olivia," she said one day to the deputy chief accountant, a nervous, rushing woman, "there's something I'd like to tell you." She stopped and looked at Ashley like an insect. "Your girls are throwing documents in the trash when they should be shredding them in the shredder. There's numbers and calculations in there. Just the other day someone threw out a balance sheet, just like that. You can't do that. Are you trying to teach us how to work?" She arched an eyebrow in response. "I don't need you to tell us what we can and can't do. Mind your own business, sweetheart, and stay out of it." Ashley swallowed the undeserved insult and went on with her work. The pay was good, and she was even able to send money to her family a few times. She missed home terribly and traveled there every chance she got. Soon she saw an unusual excitement in the office, running throughout the huge room. Even she, who had nothing to do with the affairs of the firm, realized that something out of the ordinary was going on. After greeting someone by the hand with a word or a nod, a short, dry, middle-aged man in a suit and thin gold-rimmed glasses walked out with a quick, confident stride. Ashley realized from his tense face and frozen, ingratiating smile that this was an unusual visitor. "Who is it?" she asked Aaron, the young accountant, who had been on friendly terms with Ashley lately, and had even chatted with her a couple of times. "Really?" Aaron's eyes widened. "That's Jason Smith, the CFO. You're new here. He's been gone a long time. He's got family in Miami. Well, his daughter was born there, so he took a long vacation." Aaron went on to recount gossip about the CFO's love life. But Ashley was no longer interested, so she thanked Aaron and went on with her work. That afternoon, Ashley stayed late at work after her shift ended. After spending time washing windows and leaving the cleaning of the CFO's office for last, she was startled to see a streak of light under his door. Ashley stood there pondering what she should do. Then the door swung open. Jason Smith stood in the doorway. "Do you want my office?" She heard a soft, slightly husky voice. "Come in. I was just leaving." He turned his back to her, walked to his huge desk and sat down. Hello, Ashley suddenly decided to address this strict, business-suited man. He looked up and stared at her blankly. He probably would have been just as surprised if a chair had spoken to him. what he asked for some reason. And then, as if realizing, "Excuse me." "Hello." "Jason Smith, I'd like to talk to you," Ashley said. "Or should I say, when I'm taking the trash out of the trash can. And you know I don't mean to gossip or complain, but sometimes I find documents in the trash that could be used against the company's interests if I wanted to." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he stood up, walked around the office, and turned to face Ashley. He was looking at her now, not absent-mindedly, but intently and carefully. "Now," he said, "what kind of documents did you find and what departments? More details, please. And please, sit down." He made an inviting gesture, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. "Jason Smith, once again, I'm not going to complain or set anyone up," Ashley said. "But I've tried to bring this situation to the departmental staff and no one wants to hear me out. And we're talking about personal data, accounting data, your company's financials, I think." Ashley continued, noticing that the man was listening to her very carefully, that we need to tighten control over the handling of documents, especially their disposal. It's not right that I, a simple cleaning lady, know, for example, what the company's revenue was last month and what the current penalty for tax arrears is. Jason Smith leaned back in his chair, his gaze now expressing keen interest. "But I think you're being modest," he said. "You're not an easy cleaner, to say the least. What's your name, by the way?" "Ashley," she said, and looked him in the eye. "And I understand from what you've said that you know about accounting." "Ashley, where are you from?" Jason Smith asked. "Well, I'm an accountant by training," she said. "I don't have a college degree, but I graduated with honors and worked for a couple of years as an economist at a large plant." Seeing that he continued to listen to her attentively and interestedly, she suddenly made up her mind. "I can't say that I'm such an outstanding specialist, but I also noticed errors in the wires, for example." Jason Smith became wary. For example, your accountant uses account 40 goods to record annual production, but you should use account 43 finished goods. Then there will be no error in cost accounting. After all, you already paid a penalty of almost $70,000 last quarter for this error. But nothing has changed. Jason Smith put his gold-rimmed glasses back on his nose and interlocked his fingers. "Amazing. Interesting things you're telling me. A simple cleaning lady, Ashley." But he took a pen and began to write something quickly in his day planner. "You are now clearly out of place, finishing your work today, and I expect you here in my office by 9 o'clock tomorrow." All of this was said in a tone that had no hint of doubt or suggestion that she herself might want something different. The next day, Ashley, dressed in her best pantsuit, to the amazement of the entire office, sat in front of the door to the CFO's office at the gesture of the receptionist. She realized that she was inviting her to come inside. Ashley opened the office door. Jason Smith was sitting at his desk talking on the phone. Yes, exactly what we need," she heard him say. "Perfect for you in every way. And no strings attached. That's all right, I'll call you back." He disconnected the phone and made an inviting gesture with a smile. "Please, sit down, Ashley's cleaning lady." He was quiet for a moment and then continued. "You are certainly out of place here, it's quite obvious. I have a proposition for you. We have a sales branch. Would you like to be the chief accountant there?" The offer struck Ashley so much that it even seemed absurd to her. She looked at him questioningly, trying to see if he was joking. The man sitting across from her was a solid, serious man who clearly didn't have time for such silly pranks. "Me? Suddenly the chief accountant of the cleaning ladies? Chief accountants, and even without higher education. It doesn't happen like that." She looked at her interlocutor in panic. "Don't be so frightened," Jason Smith said. He stood up, walked around the table, and sat down across from Ashley. "Chief accountant is a big word for it. In fact, the firm is small, with only 3 employees and only 1 accountant. He's both chief and staff in one person, so to speak. And I've already made sure that you are quite wealthy as an accountant. By the way," he smiled, "about our conversation yesterday. I've already given orders to check the order of accounting entries. And you know you were right. There are a lot of mistakes, so you should not doubt your own abilities. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you agree?" He glanced at his watch, and then at Ashley, clearly expecting her to answer immediately. When he saw her hesitation, he struck the final blow. "I'm sorry, I forgot the most important thing," he smiled charmingly. "The money question. You are, of course, interested in the question of salary." But let's start with a trial period to agree on $100,000 a month, and then we'll see the results. Do we have a deal? Ashley, who had never received even a quarter of that amount, was stunned. $100,000 a month. To buy good winter clothes and shoes, to repair the roof of the house, and finally to pay for her grandmother's knee surgery, which she had long dreamed of. All these desires swirled in her head. If she could earn so well, she could really help her family. A chance like that she might never get again. She should give it a try. She should be able to do it. I agree, she said quietly, and smiled. Thank you, Jason, for your trust. He looked at Ashley carefully, and for some reason he lowered his eyes, tracing some lines on the desk calendar. It was as if he was hesitating about something. At least it seemed to her, for some reason, that he was confused and thoughtful for a few seconds. But it passed quickly, and in front of her again sat, confident in each of his decisions, of the leader. Well, excellent, he said. From tomorrow you will start your duties. I'll make sure you're up to speed. Ashley threw herself into her work with all her heart. She was a good bookkeeper, and she performed her duties with integrity. But pathological honesty, gullibility, and unsophisticated style are not the best qualities for the chief accountant of a commercial firm with an unclear reputation. She really for a long time did not notice that in parallel with the daily official activities of their firm was some barely noticeable work. Sometimes she came across documents with contents that embarrassed her. For example, one day she found invoices that she had signed earlier as chief accountant, but the recipients had been changed after she had been given large sums of cash to pay for what she was told were some unforeseen expenses. She decided to talk to the holding company's CFO. But Ashley kindly explained to Jason Smith she is no longer a child. It's a common practice. Any commercial firm takes some of its income out of tax. But it doesn't concern you. I have to tell you, work in peace. By the way, you've got a big job coming up, opening a line of credit. You remember? Yes, of course, Jason Smith, Ashley said thoughtfully. I'm preparing the paperwork. Good, he smiled thinly. And if all goes well, you'll receive a substantial bonus 3 months after the firm receives the loan. 2 men in uniform entered Ashley's office without knocking. All documents of the firm were arrested, and Ashley herself was accused of large-scale fraud and sent to a pre-trial detention cell. A few days later, Ashley was summoned to meet with her appointed defense attorney. Hello, Ashley, the man said with an embarrassed cough and continued in a more forceful tone, my name is Samuel Brown, and I'm your attorney. I will defend you at your trial, and I will try to. He clearly stumbled and was again embarrassed. I'll try to get the charges against you dropped, or at least part of them. He looked at her with a long, attentive stare, as if trying to penetrate her soul. She averted her eyes indifferently. Ashley, he came to the table and sat down across from her. This isn't going to work. You and I need to establish a rapport, a trust. Otherwise, it's not going to work, you know. Tell me, you're innocent of what you're accused of. What does it matter if I'm guilty or not? She spoke tiredly. Who cares but me? It matters. It matters to me very much, he answered excitedly. Though I'm sure you're innocent anyway. I knew it as soon as I saw you. She looked at the man with some interest and smiled a little. As soon as you saw me, she interjected ironically. I wonder how you can work as a lawyer if you make such conclusions based on looks alone. It's ridiculous. But he was clearly embarrassed again. I'm not much of a lawyer. To be honest, Ashley grinned bitterly. And neither am I the chief accountant. But even though I'm not very experienced and I don't know much about economics, he continued stubbornly, I'll do my best to defend you, or at least get your sentence reduced. He tried to say the last word as softly and quietly as possible, but Ashley still flinched as if struck. So you are charged with accessory after the fact. Ashley listened to his voice and everything he said. The charges and the articles of the criminal code that corresponded to those charges coalesced into a giant, sticky web in the center of which she, a poor, foolish, naive butterfly, fluttered. Samuel Brown, Ashley's lawyer, fought the trial like a knight without fear or reproach. And he himself, in his imagination since childhood very rich, imagined himself the savior of Ashley, a beautiful lady who was captured by an evil dragon. And he is the only one who can protect and save her. He spent more than one sleepless night to understand the intricacies of the firm's accounting, mountains of documents and invoices, real and fictitious transactions. As a result, having spent several weeks and almost all his savings, he proved Ashley's non-involvement in most of the violations. And the heaviest charge was dropped, but he still could not get her full release. She got 2 years in juvie. Before she left for juvie, Ashley met with her lawyer. She had already come to terms, lived with her fate, and like the women of her family, accepted her fate. Her red hair was braided into 2 braids. Her face was scrubbed clean without the slightest trace of makeup, and she had lost weight and looked more like a frightened 14-year-old girl than a grown woman with years of darkness ahead of her. She seemed almost saintly to Samuel. He'd realized long ago, admitted to himself, that he loved Ashley with all his heart. He was afraid to give away his feelings, but he wanted to at the same time. He couldn't decide whether it would be better for Ashley to know that he loved her, or whether he shouldn't embarrass and disturb her before he left. Ashley looked up at him with haggard eyes and smiled involuntarily. How cute was he after all, her lawyer? Tall, a little stooped, angular but broad-shouldered, with thick, long, uncut blonde hair that kept falling over his eyes, and he kept tucking it back. There was something inexplicably native about him to her. He was a real man, the way her mom said her father had been, the way she remembered Christopher. Ashley drove some incomprehensible excitement inside and spoke up. "Samuel Brown, I am grateful for everything you have done for me. I realize that if it weren't for you, I would have gotten a much longer sentence. I don't owe you the 4 years of juvie you got off me. I probably owe you my life. I know that, and I'll never forget it. But it's already happened, and there's nothing you can do about it, and I'll have to disappear from life for 2.5 years. Wait, don't interrupt me, Sasha. Can I call you that?" He quickly nodded his head in agreement. "You have already done so much for me. Do one more thing. You know I have a family in the village, my mother, grandmother, and son. I don't want them to know what happened to me. Our family wasn't happy enough as it was. And now this. My grandmother is much closer to me than my mom. That's just the way it is. I'm just afraid she's not going to make it through this. Jason. Yeah, I mean, sure, kids get used to everything. But I don't want him to see me in jail, in these clothes, like this. No, not like this." She choked with sobs, but making an effort to restrain herself, angrily wiped her tears and continued. "I wrote the letter. I made up a whole story. I lied about everything. Of course, Grandma won't believe it. But if this letter is brought by a good, sincere person, such as you, Sasha, she might listen, understand, accept and agree to wait. I know I can't. I have no right to hang this on you. But I have no one else. And I can only trust you. I beg you, Sasha, if you can, do this for me." She handed him a few folded sheets of notebook paper, written in small handwriting. Samuel gently took the sheets from her hands and looked into her eyes. "Ashley, Tanetka." He swallowed convulsively. "I'll be waiting for you." Ashley had stood her ground, endured, survived 2 years, keeping herself as a person, pure and whole. She's learned a lot, rethought a lot. She saw and learned things she would never have seen or known in a normal life. Many of the things she saw she would have preferred to never experience. But that's how life happened. She got out of the colony and went to the only place on earth where she was welcome, at least as she hoped, home. On a clear autumn day, she got off the bus and wandered towards her grandmother's house, trying not to be recognized. "Hello, Grandma," she said simply to Barbara, who was furiously beating the dust out of the mat with a stick. The very old woman looked up at her, dropped the stick, and woke up for the time being. So much chemistry. Suddenly a question hammered in Ashley's brain, the answer to which she couldn't remember in any way. Barbara managed her weakness, swiped the tears from her eyes, and slowly approached Ashley. Quietly, she asked her granddaughter and hugged her as she had as a child. They shoulders shook, but quietly. Again, like as a child, coaxed her grandmother in Ashley's ear on her back, her shoulders, her head. "Quiet girl, my golden girl. It's nothing. Ashley, nothing. Dirt doesn't stick to gold." Ashley looked into Barbara's eyes. There was nothing but love in them. Ashley pressed her grandmother's hands to her face and sighed. She was home. And Jason, she suddenly realized when both of them had calmed down from their first excitement. "Where's Jason?" "Grandma, it's like kindergarten." "You're Jason," Barbara replied. "I'm too old to keep up with your father, you know. Your mother got smart and got a job. So we put him in the garden. A long time ago, about 2 years ago. Yes, he's fine there. He's already the main man there, she laughed. He's probably forgotten all about me, Ashley said fearfully. Well, there you go, she said. Who would let him forget you? We talk about you every day, and he's never parted from your picture. And Andrew keeps telling him his mom's coming back. Mom will be here soon, mom this and mom that. Andrew? Who's Andrew? Ashley looked at Barbara in surprise. Well, there's this new good man. We've been having a hard time without him all this time. You'll get to know him soon enough, she said with a sly look at her granddaughter. By the way, remember where the kindergarten is? Well, it's time to pick up Jason. You go, girl, get your son, you go. Jason had grown and changed a lot since the last time she'd seen him. Ashley didn't even recognize him right away. She stood under an old birch tree by the fence of the kindergarten and waited, not knowing what to do. Jason ran out of the kindergarten gate and sprinted off, not paying any attention to the lone figure standing under the tree. Hi, he shouted to someone, spreading his arms happily. Ashley followed Jason with her eyes and was surprised to see him running toward the man, squatting down to him and spreading his arms wide as well. It was a man. In the twilight of the fall evening, Ashley could only see the outline of the figures and the bright blue stain of a jacket. After a while, she realized that it wasn't so much the twilight as the tears that blurred her eyes. Jason, she whispered to her son. Jason, meanwhile, ran up to the squatting man and hung around his neck. The man wrapped his arms around the baby, lifted him to his full height above the ground, and began to spin him on his axis. It was obvious that this ride had been performed many times before and was familiar to both of them. Jason squealed enthusiastically, and the man laughed. Ashley closed her eyes and pressed her back against the trunk of the old birch tree. For a few moments she thought she recognized Christopher in the man. And going crazy, she thought sadly, swallowing the tears that continued to flow. The merry fiddling continued between the boy and the man, accompanied by children's laughter, squeals and delighted squeals. The man also continued to laugh and finally said, "That's it. Jason, Christopher, stop the pampering or your pants and shirt will go again." The man's voice sounded familiar to Ashley. She squinted, trying to make him out through the fall twilight and the tears in her eyes. Finally, she recognized the blonde, disheveled hair, the tall, slightly bent figure. It was Samuel Brown, her lawyer. Jason spotted her first. He stopped in his run, as if he had run into an invisible wall, crouched down with his hands on his knees, and leaned over and rushed toward her. "Mom, did you make it?" Ashley squatted down, wrapped her arms around the fleeing Jason, and pulled him against her, breathing in her son's dear, beloved scent hard and tight. The smell she'd dreamed about every night for 2 years. Samuel walked slowly toward her. He squinted myopically. "Hello, Ashley," he said in a voice hoarse with excitement. "Hello, Sam," she replied, also feeling a lump in her throat. "You've gotten even more beautiful, Ashley. I've been expecting you and it's really good to see you." "Glad." Just glad, she looked up at him with a smile. "And here I am, Sam, seeing you, just happy." She brought her face close to Samuel's and kissed his cheek. They walked down the street, rustling the gold and red leaves that carpeted the ground. Jason held onto his mother's hand with one hand and Samuel's with the other, and walked cheerfully between them, jumping up and down every chance he got, making sure to lift as many fallen leaves into the air as he could. It was extremely exciting. And Jason was perfectly content, especially because neither his mother nor Uncle Sam ever scolded him for his outright hooliganism. They had no time for each other, looking into each other's eyes and smiling. Emily was raised by her father, Joseph. She did not remember her mother and did not know what happened to her. Her father didn't like to talk about it and always left her in different ways. As time went on, Emily grew older. Here, just to get away from questions about her mother was no longer possible. On one of the next days, the 16-year-old girl rolled the most real scandal. "Why don't you tell me what happened to Mom? Is she alive or not? Why do you avoid this topic every time? How many times can you do this?" Emily paced from side to side, trying to calm herself down, but it was having no effect. Her father looked at her sympathetically, realizing that keeping quiet on the subject had become too hot in their small family. "Why are you silent again? Where's my mother? Why didn't you ever tell me where she is? Maybe I want to visit her. I want to tell her what's going on in my life, even if she never hears me." Emily had long ago concluded that something had happened to her mom, and that was why her father was keeping her tragic fate quiet. Perhaps it really would have been better that way. However, there was not a shred of truth in the girl's speculation. Sighing heavily, Joseph walked over to his daughter and put his hand on her shoulder. He looked carefully into the girl's eyes, trying to calm her resentment a little. But it was to no avail. "Who the hell are you to withhold information about my mother? And the one that carried me under her heart, that gave me this life. You have no right to withhold that information from me. Who is she? Where is she? Tell me something about her." Emily screamed with helplessness, with the pain and resentment that had been lurking in her soul for so long. Tears streamed down her cheeks, which she stubbornly ignored. Joseph's heart clenched unpleasantly as the picture unfolded, and he exhaled convulsively. And gathering all his will into a fist, he muttered, "Your mother just didn't want you. We found out late enough in the pregnancy that there was nothing we could do. She didn't want to have you, didn't want to become a mother, thought she was too young for it, and convinced me too that you didn't fit into our future. But even before you were born, I felt that you needed me, that you were the ray of hope for a bright future that I was not ready to give up. She could never love you, and right after you were born, she wrote a rejection letter. I begged her to think about it. I begged her to stay and be with you for a while. I assured her that she would love you, but your mother was adamant. She didn't want to spend time raising a child. She didn't want to wake up at night. She didn't want to change diapers. She didn't want to lose her beauty through constant sleep deprivation and stress. And she walked away, leaving you so tiny and defenseless alone in the hospital." His voice shook, and he stopped, deciding it wasn't worth continuing the story any further. Emily stared at her father in silence, trying to comprehend what she had just heard and make sense of her feelings. The only thing in Emily's girl's eyes was the question why. But that's not what she asked her father. "And you didn't even try to find her, didn't try to show her what I've become independent and not requiring so much attention and care. Maybe she could have loved me, wanted to come back and start a family. Why didn't you try to make sure I had a mom like any other normal kid?" Emily switched to shouting again, not holding back her resentment and negative emotions. She looked at her father with incomprehension, trying to understand why he was so calm, why he was not worried, telling about how he just gave up the chance to build a normal family. The man looked attentively at his daughter, giving her a chance to spill everything that had accumulated. Then, calmly answered, "I tried. Gave her time to think about the decision and called only a few days after you were at home. But she didn't pick up that day, the next day, or the week after. She couldn't do that to me. She wouldn't leave me. She gave birth to me, carried me under her heart. Why doesn't she love me? Why do all mothers love their children, but mine abandon me?" Joseph gently pulled his daughter close, trying to calm her. Tears were already streaming down Emily's cheeks. Sobs echoed every second. He felt he had started this conversation early. But would there be a good time when the story of a child abandoned by her mother wouldn't resonate with pain? "I don't know, honey, I really don't. The only thing I do know is that I would never leave you. I would never hurt you like that. Would never let anyone take you away." The man fell silent, wondering whether to continue the story or drop the subject. After a few minutes of tense silence, he decided to continue so as not to return to the painful subject. "I tried to tell her what a beautiful little princess you are. I sent her pictures of you, wrote messages, letters to her parents, but all in vain. After a couple years, she blocked me, changed her number, her parents moved. I lost all contact and didn't know how to tell her about my growing angel." He stopped talking. Emily's shoulders shook with sobs. That was all he wanted to say, what she should have known about her birth mother. For several minutes, father and daughter stood in silence. Joseph was giving Emily time to realize the bitter truth. Gradually, she calmed down, her breathing evened out, but the trembling in her body remained. The girl looked into her father's eyes. "But since it happened, since she gave up on us, why didn't you just set up a life with another woman? A lot of people do that. I wouldn't have known she wasn't my mother. How could I lie to you like that my whole life? If I told you that the woman you thought was your mother wasn't, wouldn't you look for your mother? Wouldn't you want to know why you have a stepmother? Would you forgive me? After this?" Emily was silent. She had never before thought about how her father would have lived if he had had another woman. Would he have been happy with her, or would he have continued to blame himself for Emily's motherlessness? Would he have been able to never tell her that she was being raised by her stepmother? Or would she have found out when the time came anyway? The girl looked at her father carefully. There was no sadness in his eyes, no longing or any other feelings that expressed bitterness at the choice she had once made in favor of her own child. She gently put her arms around the man and spoke almost in a whisper. "If you are happy, I will be happy. If you want to build a relationship, you want to be happy and loved, then I will be happy if in your life there will be a worthy woman who will be by your side both in sorrow and in joy. You have the right to do as you see fit." Emily smiled. Joseph couldn't see it, but he could feel it. He could hear it in the timbre of her voice, in the way she snuggled gently against him, and the breathy way she spoke of what she was thinking. The man had never considered that model of a future with someone other than his daughter. She had always occupied all his thoughts, all his feelings. He couldn't imagine bringing a strange woman into the house and telling his daughter to call her mom. But now Emily had grown up, matured, and realized that there must be room for love in everyone's life. Maybe she was right. Perhaps he really should think about finding a worthy woman with whom he could meet his old age. But had he known how such a wish would end, he would have thought several more times before making life unbearable not only for himself, but also for a completely innocent man whom his daughter simply could not accept. No matter how hard he tried to make it happen. Time passed. Emily had already forgotten about that conversation with her father, after which the man seriously thought about his lonely future. After the departure of his daughter to study, despite his inner resistance, he still decided to give himself the opportunity to be happy and began to actively search for a woman with whom he could get closer, so as not to meet old age alone. A couple more months passed. Emily continued to go to school, studying hard but acceptably. In the absence of constant supervision, the girl felt free and completely left to herself, and therefore did not worry about bad grades, failed tests, and scandals with teachers. But only until her father was called to the school. One weekday evening, Joseph's phone rang. The man picked up the phone, and then after a second he looked at his daughter with some displeasure and contempt in his gaze. The girl immediately understood everything and wanted to leave, but suddenly her father gestured for her to return to her seat. Emily exhaled convulsively and sank back into the chair, squeezing her head into her shoulders, and already realizing what was going to happen. "Yes, thank you, I understand," Joseph said into the phone. "I'll try to come in tomorrow at lunchtime and talk to the history teacher about my daughter's progress. Thank you for calling. Have a good day." The last words sounded like a sentence, and Emily knew that under the circumstances she couldn't avoid a serious conversation with her father. She looked at him carefully, hoping he would cool down and not lecture her. But he wouldn't. The man moved closer and started talking. "Do you realize that no one will need you without an education? What do you plan to do with your life? Work as a janitor or maybe a cleaner? Or do you want to find a rich husband who will provide for you and not put you in anything? You will live like a bird in a golden cage, where you will constantly close your mouth and point to your place. Is that the future you want for yourself or what you're trying to achieve?" Emily lowered her eyes to the floor. She didn't like these conversations with her father and didn't expect teachers or the principal to decide to contact her father to discuss her grades at all. The silence was becoming oppressive. She had to say something to avoid looking completely stupid. "I just don't see the point of this story. Why would I want to know what happened before I was born and what I can't influence? It's just unnecessary information that will never be useful to me. Or do you think we're going to have uprisings or presidents being overthrown again? We're in a completely different time. And all this history I'm learning has nothing to do with our lives. I don't need it." Joseph looked at his daughter carefully. For such a young age, the reasoning seemed serious but also childish. "You should learn history, at least so that I don't get called to school on my work days, and so that I don't have to blush, because you don't think a history teacher is an important teacher. But that's my opinion. You've always taught me to stand up for it, to always stand my ground, to always fight back. And now you're saying it's wrong. What do you expect me to do if you can't decide how I should behave? And now you're telling me I have 7 Fridays in a week." Emily jabbed her finger and rose quickly from her seat to avoid further conversation. However, her father held her hand. "My dear, you must understand the difference between standing up for your rights and violating the rights of others. Your rights end exactly where another person's rights begin, and you cannot violate them." The man let go of his daughter's hand. and the daughter, after staring at the gas station for a few seconds, abruptly turned around and went to her room. Joseph sighed heavily, anticipating not the most pleasant conversation with the teacher the next day, and not yet realizing that fate was preparing for him such a welcome and long-awaited gift. Barely free at lunchtime, Joseph hurriedly headed to school. Realizing that he didn't have much free time to spend talking to the teacher, it was easy to find the classroom. However, before he could even enter it, the man froze. Sitting at the teacher's desk was a young and attractive woman who looked completely lost in a classroom full of humming. It took a few seconds until Joseph was able to pull himself together and get out of his strange stupor, confidently entering the classroom and speaking menacingly. Everyone calmed down immediately. Who taught you to behave like this in front of adults? Or some of you want to replace the teacher and tell a new topic on your own for a grade? Let's also call the principal to see how smart the students in this school are. The class was instantly completely silent. Not even the rustling of textbook pages or any of the other rustles that are so common in classrooms could be heard. The woman gratefully looked up at her savior, trying to figure out where she could see him. "Good afternoon. I was asked to come in to talk to you about my daughter Emily's 8th grade performance, and she's been a little off her game lately. And yesterday the principal pointed out that she's been especially bad in history class. So I thought I'd come here to talk to you in person." The man smiled bewilderedly, realizing that his appearance was a lifeline for the teacher, and therefore there was hope in his soul that she would somehow change her mind about his daughter. But how could she not? The woman nodded slowly, looking around the class and giving the assignment they were to complete while she spoke to the student's father. The classroom continued to be completely silent even after the adults stepped out into the hallway, which was a great indicator of how Joseph's words had affected the overall atmosphere in the classroom. "Do you understand? Your daughter Emily, she does not consider my subject important at all, and therefore she does not learn anything, does not want to answer in class, does not do her homework." I tried to explain to her that it is necessary to study the material at least in order to successfully graduate from school and enter the direction that will be interesting to her in the future. But these words had no effect on your girl, the teacher began. And already at this moment Joseph realized that the conversation would not be very pleasant. She behaves terribly in class, constantly distracts other students, and sometimes even does everything possible to disrupt the class. I reprimanded her, called the principal to the lessons, used disciplinary measures. However, there was no result. Therefore, I had no choice but to call you to the school for an educational conversation. You must influence your child, otherwise she will not finish school with a good average grade, and this will have a negative impact on her future. I hope you realize that this is serious." Joseph took a deep breath. He had certainly expected nothing good to be said about his daughter during this meeting, but he couldn't even imagine it being this bad. He looked at the teacher carefully and tried to squeeze out at least a semblance of a smile. "I'll do everything I can to influence her," he said. "But you know it's not as easy as it may seem. I'm always at work, doing everything I can to make a decent living for her, so I don't have enough time to raise her." The teacher blushed visibly, whether from the man's words about doing his best and her judging him, or from the strange feeling that was growing stronger in her soul by the minute, making her anxious and breathless. The silence became tense, and the woman made an effort to break it. "Forgive me for an inappropriate question, and why the girl's mother does not participate in her upbringing. Does she also work all the time? Or maybe you have younger children, and she simply does not have time for an adult child, who in this case is left to himself. Just at this age, a girl needs a lot of attention from her mother. Practice shows that it is mothers who have the greatest influence on the unformed psyche of the child. So you talk to your spouse or invite her to school so that I can talk to her. Maybe it will give better results." Joseph's eyes showed a faint pain that hadn't left him in years. He'd always tried to be the best father he could be, investing all his energy and money in his daughter, giving her all his free time. But apparently it was not enough. He could not bring her up to be a decent person, instill a love of education and respect for elders. He could not replace her mother. The man raised his eyes to the teacher, who watched his reaction confusedly. And as hard as it was to admit, he dared to say the words that had been running through his mind for so long. "We have no mother and no one to replace her. Perhaps it was because of me, because of my desire to become a father, because I did not support my beloved in her decision to give up the child. Perhaps I am to blame for the fact that Emily has become so spoiled I can't give her enough time to be around her all the time. to help her with her lessons and personal problems. Perhaps if she had a mother, if I had made more of an effort to find and keep her. If Joseph had been a little more persistent and confident back then, his little daughter Emily would have been a very different person. Perhaps there is some truth in what is happening now and in the words of others. Maybe he's just a bad father who couldn't handle raising his own child. That's all there is to it. Joseph faked a smile, trying to look confident and convincing, pretending that he wasn't hurt by his own words, that he had long ago come to terms with what had happened and knew he was failing as a parent. He stood still, looking at the drawings on the floor in the hallway, and suddenly felt the touch of a warm woman's hand. "I'm sorry, I had no idea you had such a situation in your family," the woman said. "I am sure that you are a wonderful father and you are doing everything you can to make your daughter happy." The teacher looked at the man warmly, trying to convey her sympathy. "I didn't mean to hurt you or hurt you. Emily never said she didn't have a mom, or I wouldn't have brought it up. I'll try to be more sympathetic to her, and given the circumstances, I'll talk to the other teachers. We understand how hard it is for a girl to go through a difficult adolescence, albeit with the support of such a wonderful father." The woman raised her eyes to Joseph, who was looking at her with sincere gratitude. There was so much appreciation and warmth in his gaze that it made her uncomfortable, and she wanted to pull her hand away, but he intercepted it, pressing it to his chest. "Thank you so much. I am very grateful that you are willing to understand our situation and help my daughter with her studies. It's very valuable to us, and I'm sure Emily will do her best to improve her grades as well." "Well, thank you. But you can just call me Mary," the teacher said. "Thank you very much, Mary. You're a wonderful woman. I hope you have a good life. I have to go to work, or I'll be late after my lunch break, and that's not welcome in this company." "Yes, of course. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to me about your daughter." Joseph turned to leave, but Mary called out to him. "Excuse me, but why don't I come over and talk to you about Emily's studies and grades? Perhaps my words will have some effect on her, and she will decide to get smart. It's not hard for me, if that's what you need." Joseph smiled warmly, nodded, and said gratefully, "I would really appreciate it if you would talk to my daughter, and I confess I would enjoy spending some more time with you. You're a very pleasant woman. We look forward to seeing you tonight then. I think Emily will be glad to have this kind of participation from her teachers." Joseph walked briskly toward the exit. Mary felt her face flush. She had a strange, frightening, yet pleasant feeling for Joseph, and she wouldn't mind spending a little more time with him herself. Emily took the news that her teacher was coming to talk to her about her grades very badly. "I don't need strangers giving me advice on how to live my life," she resented her father as she watched her father prepare for the history teacher's arrival. The man wanted to make the best impression, so he even left work early to clean up the house and prepare something for dinner. He didn't seem to mind his daughter's outrage at all. Joseph was absorbed in his own thoughts. "Do you even hear me?" Emily almost shouted. "I do not want her to come to our house and tell us how to live properly, how to behave, and how to treat her. I don't need her guidance and advice. I can fix my own grades in school, Dad." Joseph perked up, realizing how deeply he had thought about their recent acquaintance. He seemed to have found the one person he was ready to spend his life with, someone who made him feel at ease, who truly understood and supported him. But is it appropriate to date his own daughter's teacher? Does she have a husband or a young man? And most importantly, how will Emily react to the news that her father has fallen in love with the teacher, whom the girl, it turns out, sincerely hates? A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. It was Mary. As promised, the woman looked just fine, not at all reminiscent of the teacher the man had seen during the day at school. Her makeup, beautiful dress, and confident gait made her different from the hunted mouse he'd encountered. But that only added a fire to his gaze and made his new acquaintance even more attractive and alluring. "Good evening, Mary. You're looking very well. It's good to see you." "Good evening. It's nice to see you again, Joseph." Emily looked out of the living room, wondering what was going on in the other room, and since when her father had become so polite and courteous to women. But when the woman saw the girl looking intently in their direction, she immediately returned the businesslike tone and serious look she always used at school. "I hope Emily knows what I'm here for, and that she and I are going to have a serious conversation. You warned her about this, didn't you?" "Of course I did. Emily's waiting for you in the living room. She knows what you've come for." Mary, as if ignoring the confusion on the man's face, went into the room where Emily was waiting for her. The girl was sitting on the sofa, making it clear that she was not happy about the situation and had no plans to talk to her teacher. Mary looked at her carefully and said, "Hi, Emily. Your father, Joseph, is a little worried about your performance in school. I know you're a smart girl, but lately your grades have been slipping. Why don't we talk about what's going on? Look, studying is an important part of life. It helps you decide your future career, develops your thinking skills and self-discipline. I want to help you, but to do that, I need to understand what's wrong. Maybe you find it difficult to learn the material or lack motivation. We'll figure it out together. Emily, you're an amazing girl with a lot of potential. I can see you trying, but something is keeping you from performing at your best. Let's find a solution that will help you learn the program and get you back on track. I will be there for you and will do my best to support you. Joseph is worried because he's worried about your future. He wants you to have lots of opportunities and prospects after school. But this is your life, and you will choose your own path. Our job is to help you go after your goals with ease and confidence." Emily looked at Mary, her teacher. She could see irritation in her eyes. Nevertheless, she decided to answer. "Mary, you are very nice trying to support me. But I know exactly what you're talking about. My studies, my future, my goals, they're all important. However, at the moment, I just don't have the desire to make the effort. Maybe that will change later, but right now I'm not interested in cramming textbooks and writing tests. So unless you have any more new information or advice, we have nothing to talk about." Emily said it in a haughty tone, as if challenging her teacher. Joseph, who was in the next room, was upset at his daughter's behavior. Joseph was worried about Emily and wanted her future to be secure. He wanted Emily to grow up to be a decent, independent person, able to stand up for herself, provide for herself, and not need anything. His admonitions are attempts to help guide her on the right path. "I don't need your advice. I know how to live my own life," Emily said. "Stop telling me how to behave, what decisions to make, who to talk to. I'm an independent adult who can make decisions that affect my future. Stop telling me what to do." Emily, look, no one is prying into your life. We're trying to help you, to keep you from making serious mistakes that could negatively affect her. You see, we're not telling you what to do or how to do it. We're telling you, guiding you, helping you figure out how to do better. Mary put her soul into every word, trying to be tactful and pleasant, so that Emily understood the essence and stopped resisting, began to learn. But the result was the opposite. Emily looked at the teacher unhappily and spoke haughtily. "Tell those who need your advice about how to live better. I don't need them at all, and I'm sure that I can organize my life without your interference. Thank you for coming, but I don't intend to talk to you anymore. My friends are waiting for me. Have a good day." Without waiting for a reply, Emily stood up and headed for the exit. The door slammed. Joseph jumped up and walked quickly into the living room, expecting that it was his daughter's teacher who had left, not her. Looking confused at the obviously upset Mary, he sat down next to her and spoke quietly. "She's always been temperamental and explosive, and this has nothing to do with you. She's hard to please. She does things her own way. Do not take her behavior to heart. It has nothing to do with you." Joseph noticed the warmth and appreciation in Mary's eyes and, looking away, continued. "Thank you for trying to talk to her. It may not have been successful, but I'm sure she appreciated your attempt to help. But the important thing is that I at least tried to help you," Mary admitted suddenly, smiling softly. Joseph quickly looked at her in surprise. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to try to influence your daughter. I'm sure she and I can still find common ground. She's not what she wants to be. She is very vulnerable inside and hides it behind a mask of detachment." Joseph smiled at Mary and gently touched her hand. "I am very grateful that you were able to make time for my child. I understand that you have a lot of things to do and worry about. This is very important to me, and I must admit I was very glad when you came to visit us. I made dinner, by the way. It's not a work of art, of course, but I'd be delighted if you'd stay and try it." Mary agreed. The couple felt the attraction, but in a way they tried to hide it, to suppress the strange feelings growing inside, preventing them from thinking straight. But no matter how people fight fate, they still find themselves subject to feelings and desires. Joseph and Mary are no exception. The relationship between them spiraled rapidly. After a couple of weeks, Mary began to visit her new suitor more often and even stay overnight on weekends. Emily immediately noticed the change in her father's behavior. And at first she was even happy for him, but only until she found out with whom her father was building a relationship, and she wasn't going to accept his choice. "What's this all about?" Emily grudgingly asked her father during breakfast. "What is she doing in our house? Why is she even here?" Joseph looked at his daughter with incomprehension and spoke calmly. "You yourself wanted me to find a woman with whom I would spend my free time and with whom I would like to meet old age. And I found one. I began to control you less, give a lot of time to myself and my interests, and you became a fully independent person who makes his own decisions, without the constant nagging from me. What's wrong? Why aren't you happy with the choices I've made?" "Because it's not a choice," she said. "You just decided to start a relationship with my teacher so that she would do me favors at school. You decided that this way you could help me improve my grades. Well, I don't need that kind of help from you. Just know that. And you better stop this before it goes too far. Otherwise, you will regret it later, and it will be too late to change anything," the girl said grudgingly, watching her father's facial expressions carefully. "And what makes you think that I decided to start a relationship with Mary for the sake of your studies?" Joseph asked. "How so?" "It's plain and simple. I was having trouble with this particular subject. I refused to accept help from her the last time she came to our house, and you thought you could improve my grades just like that if you started a relationship with it." She waved her hand toward the bedroom. She waved her hand toward the bedroom where the woman remained, unable to find a decent word. "You decided to start a relationship with her to improve my grades, but I don't need that kind of sacrifice. Thank you very much. So, Daddy, you can dump her and live peacefully to yourself without this connection." Joseph listened attentively to his daughter, realizing that she really believed everything that was said and did not accept the possibility that he could just fall in love with his own daughter's teacher. Several tense minutes passed until he decided to tell Emily the truth. "Sweetheart, this has nothing to do with you," he said softly. "I realized that you didn't want control and that you were going to make all your own decisions. I realized that last time, so I left you alone. Gave you the freedom to take charge of your own life and make the decisions that would affect it in one way or another. I'm honestly not even sure I was doing the right thing before, trying to control you all the time. And now you have the opportunity to really make all the decisions yourself, to make the choices that will affect your life, without being constantly controlled by me or your history teacher." The man hesitated, trying to find the right words. "What about Mary? I love her very much indeed, and I want to build a happy relationship with her. They have nothing to do with you. No one's making any sacrifices to get you good grades and a happy future. I just realized at one point that I really like this woman, and apparently she feels the same way about me." Joseph smiled dreamily, already imagining a happy future with his chosen one, not paying attention to his daughter's unhappy grimace. Suddenly, Emily slammed her fist on the table, looking at her father with displeasure and saying through her teeth, "When I told you that I'd be happy if you found the woman you'd like to grow old with, I didn't mean that you should fall in love with my teacher, who would make my life at school simply unbearable." "You can't just start a relationship with her like that," Emily said grudgingly. "Everyone would know about it. What would happen then? What would they say about you?" Joseph shrugged his shoulders, expressing complete incomprehension of his daughter's displeasure. "What will they say about me? We're all adults and we understand that people fall in love," he replied. "I've spent my life raising you, giving you everything you could ever dream of. And now I want to feel happy and loved. I want to be with a woman who really loves me. I want to grow old with her. I want to spend every day at work, knowing that I will be waiting for me at home with a hot dinner. You see, I have the right to be happy too, no matter how old I am." Emily's gaze grew heavy. She looked at her dreamy father with obvious displeasure as she listened to his wishes and dreams. Emily looked at Joseph with obvious displeasure as she listened to his wishes and dreams. She hadn't expected him to find a woman so quickly. Emily had thought that he would have his personal life already after she left to study, and he was alone. Did he lack love and care from his daughter? Had he been unhappy spending time with her before? Was everything he said really true? But then why did it hurt so much inside? Why did every word he said make her so uncomfortable? Emily slowly leaned toward her father, leaving about 10 centimeters between their faces, and gritted through her teeth. "I'm sorry that you weren't happy because of me, and couldn't build the life you dreamed of because you had to take care of your daughter. Perhaps it would have been better if you had just given up on me. I would have gone to people who loved me instead of thinking of me as a burden." Emily abruptly pulled away from her father and headed for the exit. On the way, she bumped into her history teacher, Mrs. Mary. The woman smiled. "Good morning, Emily. I hope you remember that there's a history test tomorrow. Prepare well to pass it the first time." Mary wanted to touch the girl, but she took a step to the side, not allowing her to touch. Emily looked at the teacher with hatred. "I used to dislike only your subject, but now I sincerely hate you too. I hope you are happy with ruining my life." The girl quickly walked out, ignoring the teacher's incomprehensible look and her father's heavy sigh from the kitchen. She was so hurt, lonely and sad. She didn't think her own father would trade her for a woman he didn't know, be happy with her over his daughter, and choose her in the end. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving wet paths, everything squeezed inside. There seemed to be almost no air left in her lungs. The world was fading and becoming unreal. She walked on, not caring what road she traveled, just to get away from the house, not to see her father's happy face, and the one that had taken him away from his daughter. Emily didn't know how much time had passed, but when she came to, it was already dark. Looking around, the girl realized she was in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The fear inside made everything tighten. There was no one around to ask for directions. The phone was left at home. There was no money for a cab either. What to do? Where to go? After thinking for a while, Emily decided to walk in the opposite direction, hoping that on the way she would remember where she had come from. Emily felt herself getting more confused with each new turn. Tears rolled down her cheeks again, but now from helplessness and powerlessness. She didn't know where to go, she didn't know where she was or what would happen to her, and most importantly, whether anyone was even looking for her, or whether her father was only glad that such a burden as she was finally gone from his life. Inside, everything was shrinking from fear and not understanding what would happen next. It became scary to turn somewhere, to go in an unknown direction. There were sounds around, from which the girl shuddered every time. Complete darkness began to press on the psyche. The heart beat faster. It seemed that it was pounding so hard that it could break the chest. Suddenly, the girl heard some voices behind her back and turned around to see who had come outside to ask for help. There was a group of guys standing in the distance, talking loudly about something. They didn't see Emily, and so she decided to approach them herself to find out where she was and where she should go to get to the right street. But the decision made in fear and panic was not the best one, and Emily soon realized it. But it was too late. Approaching the company of guys, the girl felt a strange anxiety, which was different from the fear she had before. It seemed that getting too close was not the best decision. However, the guys had already noticed her, and were watching carefully as the frightened and completely lost girl slowly approached them. A grin appeared on the face of one of the guys, which obviously didn't bode well. But Emily still dared to ask. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Lincoln Street?" Emily stopped a few meters away, asking her question loud enough to be heard clearly in the company of the guys. Even so, no one was in a hurry to answer. One of the guys took a step closer to the girl, followed by a second and a third. They stopped just a couple dozen centimeters away from her. One examined Emily closely, and his smile only grew wider. Leaning over to her, he muttered, "What's a little girl like that doing alone? Baby time is long over at night outside, and you should be in your little crib." All the guys started laughing with glee, which made everything inside the girl feel as if she had fallen. She felt fear and excitement, realizing that it would not be possible to get rid of the attention so easily. But the main thing was to know where to go and not to provoke the guys. There were strange lights in the eyes of some of the strangers that only made Emily more nervous. It took a few dozen seconds before she was able to squeeze out a few words. "I was just taking a walk and got lost. And now I don't know how to get home." She had hoped that such a childish confession would make the boys realize that she was just a child with nothing to take from them. But it seemed that this manner of speaking only served to irritate the boys. One of them came very close to the girl and touched her shoulder. "How nice we are," he said. "You can't tell from the looks of us. You know, I especially like girls who are obedient, who will do whatever you tell them to do and don't ask questions. You're like that, aren't you?" The boy looked into Emily's eyes, and she could see the evil lights dancing in his gaze. She wanted to run, but it was too soon. And where would she go if she didn't know how to get home? And running, not knowing where to go, wasn't the best solution. She'd be exhausted too quickly, and this group of guys would easily catch up with her. So we have to somehow turn the situation around so that they tell her where to go, and only then start running. I'm sorry, but I just want to go home. My dad's waiting for me there. He must be very worried about me, Emily said in a shaky voice. Emily walked down the unfamiliar street. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. Excuse me, can you tell me where to go? This is my first time here. Two guys approached her closely. One of them ran his fingertips through her hair. Emily felt an uncomfortable sensation but stayed where she was, trying not to provoke them. If you behave and do everything we say, we'll walk you home ourselves afterwards so no one else can touch you, the other guy smirked. But only if you're good, and if you get cranky. He lowered his voice deliberately, giving it an ominous tone. Emily realized she couldn't expect any help from these guys. She thought feverishly about what she should do. She couldn't think of a single sensible way to hide or get away from a group of tough guys who clearly looked stronger and tougher than she was. Her heart was pounding faster and faster, blood pounding in her temples. So, will you behave yourself? The other guy asked again, continuing to stroke her hair. Or do you want to play naughty girl and get punished? He leaned very close to her ear. Hey, stop messing with her, shouted irritably the third guy in the crowd. Let's get out of here. How long can we stand here? We're attracting too much attention. He moved toward Emily with determination. Realizing that there might not be another chance, she ran down the street, not looking back and trying to ignore her racing heart. A second's hesitation from the boys gave her a small head start, but soon she heard them catching up to her quickly. Emily realized what would happen if they caught her. She ran as hard as she could, feeling her legs jacking up. Turning corners, winding streets, her eyes were already swimming in multicolored circles from lack of air. The realization came that there was no escape. And then Emily bumped into someone on the sidewalk. She lost consciousness, but felt someone's strong arms pick her up. The next thing she knew, it was darkness, no thought, no feeling. When Emily regained consciousness, there was light all around. She was lying on a pillow, her body aching unpleasantly, reminding her of her recent adventures. Her throat was dry. Her eyes ached from the tears shed last night. Looking around, the girl realized she was in a hospital room and tried to raise herself, but she felt dizzy and weak. Slowly lowering herself back onto the bed, she decided to wait for someone to come and explain the situation. Suddenly, Emily noticed a rustle to her left and was startled to see the boy sleeping peacefully in the chair. Her insides clenched with fear. Had she been caught after all? Had they done something to her? And now someone from that company was sitting next to her, so that she wouldn't say anything unnecessary? Tears came to her eyes, and the girl decided to leave the room and find a doctor on her own. But when she tried to get out of bed, the guy woke up. He looked carefully at Emily and, smiling slightly in a sleepy voice, said, "I'm glad you've come to your senses." The doctor said that Emily had just had a lot of exhaustion and excitement happen to her, but the guy was still worried that those bullies might have done something to her. The doctors didn't want to leave him, but since Emily's cell phone was dead and she had fallen into his arms, he was allowed to stay and monitor her condition until her parents arrived, who were due to arrive soon. In the meantime, he would guard her sleep as best he could. The guy smiled again, and that smile somehow made him feel much calmer. "So you're not one of those guys who chased me so hard?" Emily asked tiredly, slowly lowering herself back onto the bed and closing her eyes. "I was already scared that you were with them and sitting next to me to keep me from saying too much or convincing me that everything was my wish." Emily exhaled convulsively, trying to catch her breath. "Don't worry, it's okay," Joseph replied. "They've all been detained until the circumstances are clarified. They tried to prove to me that they hadn't touched you, but I didn't believe them. Now let them think about their behavior behind bars, at least until you testify." The boy moved a little closer to Emily, peering gently into her tired and frightened eyes. "Didn't your parents teach you that it was dangerous to walk alone on dark streets at this hour? What if I hadn't been around the corner? What if they'd caught up with you before you could get to me? Do you even think about the consequences of your decisions?" Emily felt herself blush thickly. She didn't want to be lectured by a complete stranger. But there was truth in his words, and she decided to tell him everything that had happened that night, so that she wouldn't seem frivolous. The boy listened to her attentively, and then, with a sigh, spoke. "Yes, I understand you perfectly well. I myself had such things misunderstanding from parents, quarrels and scandals. But once my history teacher gave me a really good advice that changed my life. You know what she said? That no matter what emotions reign in my soul, no matter how much I want to leave, to stop communicating with my parents and get rid of their overly intrusive care, they are still my parents, who gave me life and sacrificed a lot to provide for me, to bring me up and give me a chance for a normal life. That's why I should treat them with respect, tolerate their quirks, just as they once tolerated my childish whims and tears. Of course, I couldn't fully accept their behavior and forget their mistakes. But I think that advice did help me to be easier on them, to make concessions and to forgive some things." Emily lowered her eyes to the floor. Another piece of advice, another admonition, another attempt to pry into her life that she was so sick of. She sighed heavily, looked at the guy carefully and mouthed, "Thank you so much for saving me tonight. But I'll figure out how to live my life on my own. I don't need your advice and guidance. I'm sorry. I'd like to learn from my mistakes. Okay?" "No, you've got it all wrong," he smiled. "I was just sharing my life experience with you. I didn't want to teach you how to live or change your views and attitudes. I just told you how I see the situation, that's all." He went back into his thoughts. "I just realized I should have been closer to my mother. It was too late. At a time when I had no way to get close to her, or just have a heart-to-heart talk with her. Some mistakes teach valuable lessons, but the toll they take on our lives is too high." A few seconds later, there was a rustle in the hallway, and Emily's worried father came running into the room. He seemed to have aged considerably in just one night, and even changed in his face. The girl watched with incomprehension and some sympathy as his gaze frantically traveled over her, and then stopped on the boy who had remained close by. Joseph rushed to embrace his daughter, pulling her gently against him. Tears were rolling down the man's cheeks, and it looked so unusual that the girl was finally confused and froze in indecision, not understanding what to do and how to behave. She gently pulled away from her father, looking into his eyes and asking in all seriousness, "What's the matter with you? I've come home late before and stayed overnight at a friend's house without permission. And you've never been so worried?" "I always knew where you were and what was wrong with you." The man's voice trembled, and that made her feel even more uncomfortable. "And this time it seemed to me that something terrible had happened, that you would never come home." She was not used to seeing her father in such a state, not used to seeing him weak and depressed, and so everything inside clenched unpleasantly at the unfolding picture. She turned to the boy, who was watching father and daughter closely, and sighed. "Admittedly, I did get myself into a bit of a mess. But thanks to this young man," Emily pointed to the boy beside her bed, "it's all over, and I'm safe and sound now. I'm lucky I met him on the street, or I'm afraid to imagine what might have happened." She was silent, realizing that it was better for her father not to know the whole story, especially given the state he was in. Joseph immediately turned to the stranger and began to hug him. "Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking care of my daughter. She's such an impulsive but good girl. She's very lucky to have such a compassionate young man. I'm afraid to even imagine what could have happened if she had met one of those criminals that frequent the streets at night. There has been so much bad news already." The boy noticed the pain flashing in Joseph's eyes, and turning back to Emily, he noticed the pleading in her eyes. And it all became clear. He made the decision to keep quiet about everything that had happened as well. To calm the man down and not to complicate the life of the rescued girl, gently pulling away from the man's strong embrace, the guy adjusted his clothes and spoke in a calm voice. "I think that's what anyone in my place would do. Leaving such a beautiful girl in trouble is not gentlemanly, so I couldn't do anything else. Besides, I didn't do anything wrong. I just brought her to the hospital after she passed out in the street." Noticing the anxiety, if not horror, in Joseph's eyes, the guy immediately hurried to continue. "But the doctor said she was just exhausted, and that's the only reason she passed out. She's completely fine. They'll take some tests in a couple of hours, and if everything is fine, they'll let her go home." He smiled, trying to make his words positive and convincing. But there was still anxiety in Joseph's gaze. He looked at his watch and then at his daughter and spoke. "I have to report to work now. I have a promotion coming up that will pay for my princess's education, and I can't miss it. But as soon as you get all your tests done and are told you can go home, I'll come right over to pick you up." "Okay, sweetie?" Or, if you want, I can ask Mary to meet you." "No," Emily answered firmly, not even wanting to hear her father's suggestion. "I'll get home on my own, and I'm not going to let your Mary meet me. I don't need her help. She's the reason I left home. She's the reason everything happened. And you don't understand that, and you stubbornly don't see it," she said resentfully, folding her arms across her chest and turning away from her father, clearly showing that she didn't want to continue the conversation. Joseph sighed heavily, trying to understand how to please his daughter and keep his own happiness. At that moment, the stranger spoke. "You know, I'm on the car. Today I have the day off so I can take your daughter home myself after the doctors say that she is fine. Then you won't have to take off work and risk a promotion, and your beautiful daughter won't have to make concessions to be met by someone else." The guy smiled, waiting for an answer. "Of course, if you don't mind." Joseph looked at Emily carefully. Even in this situation, she was still cold and distant, and it bothered him a lot. After a few minutes, the man made his decision. "Fine, but if she doesn't want to go with you, just call me and I'll call a cab or come myself. It was nice to meet you." Joseph fell silent, realizing he didn't recognize the name of his daughter's savior. "Brian. It's nice to meet you too. I hope this isn't the last time we see each other." "It's nice to see such loving fathers," the boy smiled, extended his hand, and Joseph shook it in return, then walked briskly out of the room. "I can get home on my own. I don't need your help," she said almost in a whisper, despite Brian's presence. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you." The boy moved closer. At that moment, Emily felt her heart beat faster. "I'm telling you, I'm capable of getting home on my own," she said louder, deliberately moving away from her savior. "I don't need anyone's help or handouts. Thank you. But it seemed like you couldn't have gotten home on your own last night. Plus, your cell phone is still dead, and the hospital doesn't have a charger. How are you going to get home?" The guy reacted unhappily. "And you don't have money for a cab." Emily realized that she was in a desperate situation and would have to ask her nighttime savior for help anyway. "Okay," she muttered. There was a pause for a few minutes, in which everyone was thinking about something else, until the girl made up her mind. "Thank you for saving me. I'm afraid to imagine how things would have ended that night if you hadn't been there. Probably nothing good." "You're welcome," the boy replied simply and sincerely, looking into the eyes of the saved girl. "I couldn't leave such a beautiful girl alone. It was good that I went outside at that very time. It was like something was beckoning me to stand there. Fate, I guess." The girl was embarrassed by what she heard and hurried to look away, so as not to see the guy's smile, which gave her a wave of goosebumps inside. Brian, on the other hand, watched the girl's reaction carefully, trying not to miss anything and admiring the one that saw his soul. Emily was indeed discharged home. The tests were normal. However, the girl was advised not to overexert herself. She was released from classes for the next few days and recommended to undergo a full examination to find out the cause of fainting. As promised, Brian drove the girl home. Emily took her time getting out of his car, scrutinizing the guy. After a few minutes of silence, he asked, "Do you want me to walk you straight to the door, or can you walk yourself?" "I can do it myself," she replied. "Thank you for coming to my rescue and driving me home, despite my unbearable temper. And thank you for just being there for me the whole time. It was very important to me." Emily slowly leaned over to the guy and kissed him gently on the cheek. The warm touch of her lips sent shivers down Brian's body, and at that moment he realized that next to him was not just an accidentally rescued girl, but the one given to him by fate. The guy took Emily's number, and from that moment the couple's communication spiraled rapidly. After a couple of months, Brian offered the girl to meet, and she agreed. The relationships with him became a kind of outlet, which helped to distract from the constant reflections on his father and his new passport. Toward the end of the school year, Joseph decided to make Mary a proposal, so that in the summer to play a modest wedding and legalize their relationship. And that was the last straw in Emily's patience. She did not intend to watch her father build a life with the one she hated so much. And so the girl made a sharp, in her opinion, the only right decision to move out, and to tell her father about it she decided to immediately. "What are you leaving after the 9th grade?" Joseph said with displeasure, pacing from corner to corner in the living room and trying to calm down, so as not to say too much to his daughter. What about higher education? What about the prospects you've been striving for all these years? Are you really just ready to give up everything because of another whim? And at that moment, Mary came to him, who gently took his hand and looked into his eyes and gently said, "Let her make her own decision. She is an adult and can be responsible for her actions. We all learn from our mistakes. Maybe this will be a great lesson for her on how not to act in a situation, or maybe she will actually get what she wants out of life." Joseph exhaled convulsively. He wasn't ready to make that kind of decision from his daughter, and so the idea that it might be the right one seemed somehow unrealistic. Still, he decided to listen to his chosen one and closed his eyes and spoke. "Maybe you're right, and Emily really just needs more freedom. I just wanted to say that her decision seems wrong to me, and that I think it will lead to a completely different outcome than she expects. That's all. I didn't forbid her from making her own decision, nor did I say that she should give up her aspirations to please me. I'm just trying to keep her safe." "I understand, darling," Mary said softly, looking into Joseph's eyes. "But she's a big girl, and she can decide for herself how to be, how to behave, how to act in any given situation. She's not a little child, after all." The man sank down in his chair. He realized that it was really true, that it was time to give his daughter the opportunity to make her own decisions and dispose of her life as she saw fit. But the anxiety and worry wouldn't let him go. He looked up at his daughter, and only at that moment did he notice the unkind grin on her face. And in the next second, Emily spoke with displeasure and anger. Of course, who'd have doubted she'd say that? I've always been a bone in her throat, and now that she's had a chance to get rid of me early, she's not going to miss it. Still, I made the right decision when I realized it was time to move out. Otherwise, I would have had to endure 2 more years of a disgruntled look on my face and some stupid accusations against me. Emily forgot to put her shirt back on, or didn't wash her plate, or behaved inappropriately in front of guests. She thought that then a calm and measured life would come. As soon as I get kicked out of my own house, right resentment and dissatisfaction with the situation could be heard in Emily's voice. It was clear that the girl was not thrilled with the decision, but thought it was the right one. Confused by his daughter's words, Joseph muttered, "What does Mary have to do with it, if you yourself decided to move out after 9th grade? It's your decision, no one imposed it. Why, when Mary supported it, do you think she wants to evict you? I don't understand anything." Joseph looked at his daughter carefully, hoping she would realize the error of her ways. But Emily became even more disgruntled. "Of course you never see what's wrong," she glanced obliquely at Mary, who looked incomprehensively back and forth at her future husband and Emily, not knowing whether to intervene or remain silent. Joseph rose slowly and approached his daughter. Placing his hands on her shoulders, he looked into her eyes. "Sweetheart, why do you always have some strange competition with the woman I truly love? She hasn't replaced you for me. She hasn't become the only one I love. She has no prejudice against you. Contrary to your speculation, she's trying to connect with you, to get closer, and you're pushing her away. She's not replacing your mother, and she never intended to. But can't you have a warm relationship for my sake?" The man looked at his daughter with hope and tenderness, but her gaze became hard and displeased. "You knew from the beginning that I didn't approve of your association with my teacher. What made you think I would be thrilled to marry her? It's your decision, not mine. I don't have to support it. I'm sure she's only with you because of the house and work. Not the love you're talking about. You can see it in her." Mary sighed heavily, realizing that building a good relationship with Emily would be difficult, but she had no idea how much. Joseph replied calmly, "You're right, it's my choice and it's not your place to judge it. It's not like I'm judging your Brian and I'm trying to build a good relationship with him, because he didn't interfere with our family, try to take me away from you, or tell me how to live my life. Since you're so happy with her, you should know that you lost me because you chose her." Her Emily shouted to her father through gritted teeth. She raised her head proudly and went to her room, hoping that the conversation would influence her father's decision to marry Mary. But it didn't, and the girl decided to move away from her father as soon as she received her diploma. Emily entered college in another city and from the first days lived with Brian. He rented an apartment, paid for groceries and expenses. While the girl was studying, Brian loved her unconsciously and was willing to do anything to make her happy and stay close to her. Despite her father's protests that it was too early for Emily to live with a boyfriend, she did her own way, as always. Joseph soon reconciled, taking Brian's promise that his daughter Emily would definitely get an education and only after that become a happy mom and wife. And boy did he promise that he would. Mary and Joseph played a wedding, to which Emily decided not to come. She did not want to be present at that celebration, which she absolutely did not approve of. But Brian was not in favor of such a decision. "Why don't you want to be there for your father on such an important day?" he said. "I think he'd like it if you could come, especially since the wedding is in the summer, before school starts, which is very convenient for you." They made sure you could get to their celebration without missing school. The guy watched with incomprehension as the girl tore the wedding invitations into small pieces, sitting on the living room floor. "I won't go where I'm not welcome," Emily replied. "And I wouldn't be welcome there, believe me." "But why do you think that? They sent you an invitation, and they took the time and effort to make it and sign it. They even invited you to come early to help organize the party. This is one of the most important days of your father's life." That's right, in his life, he made the decision to marry that witch. Despite the fact that I hate her, despite our terrible relationship, despite the fact that she treated me abominably and told me how to live my life, what to do, what to wear, despite the fact that I am an adult, an independent person. And she is the reason that our relationship with my father, which he spent so long building and cherishing, has shattered. I don't want to see him choose her over me. I don't want to see him give up our good relationship for someone who only values a spacious house and a big wallet. Emily closed her eyes and sighed heavily, trying to calm down and get her thoughts in order. She didn't want to think any more about the fact that her father had chosen some other woman over her, that he had made her the center of his life, and that he had made the decision to marry in spite of her displeasure. But Brian kept asking questions, trying to figure out exactly what had happened and why Emily had this attitude toward her future stepmother. "But she didn't do anything bad to you, right? She just fell in love." "She didn't fall in love," Emily cut her off. "She came into someone else's family and made her own rules that I had to follow. And my father, like a blind sheep, didn't want to see her leading him around and making him a tosser." "Well, maybe he was just really in love with her," Brian suggested. "He wanted to do everything he could to make her happy." "I love you very much too, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that you don't need anything and can live the life you want. I always fulfill your requests." Emily looked at him unhappily. She didn't want to continue this conversation, and she certainly didn't want to waste her time explaining to him the problem and the reasons for his bad attitude. "Just trust me. She's not at all who she says she is," the girl said. "She's a disgusting, mercenary woman who will do anything to keep my father on a leash and bounce around on her hind legs. I know exactly what she's trying to accomplish, and she got it in the end. I tried to save him from this mistake. I tried to show him that he became just a slave who does not know anything and cannot distinguish lies from the truth. But he didn't listen to me. He made the choice she whispered to him. Let him suffer now." Brian was silent, realizing that the conversation would not lead to any expected result, and therefore there was no point in continuing it. Emily had almost completely stopped communicating with her father. She rarely returned his calls, hardly ever read his messages, and stopped coming home completely. She still considered him a traitor, didn't want to accept his decisions, and couldn't let go of the resentment that sat in her soul. Emily finished her studies and started working in her profession. 6 months later, Brian proposed to her. She accepted. It was decided to just sign, not to make a lavish wedding, and just spend the day for themselves. That's how it all worked out. They began to live together, to build their family life, and therefore there was no time to worry about her father and his new wife. Emily was completely immersed in her life, not yet realizing what a surprise awaits her from fate. One weekend, Emily's phone rang. She looked at the screen and saw Mary's name. Goosebumps ran down her body. Her stepmother was calling her, and she was the last person she expected to call. The girl blocked the screen, not wanting to pick up the phone, realizing that she wouldn't hear anything good. Suddenly, Brian's voice sounded. "Who's calling you on your day off? Is it work again? Is there a problem?" "No, my stepmother has decided to ruin my life by showing up again," Emily answered. "It's been so long, and she can't stand the fact that I don't want to be around their family. I'm sick of it." "Well, maybe something's wrong. She's not just calling. Pick up the phone, at least to see what they want you to do." The guy looked out from behind the corner, looking carefully at the girl, who stood near the phone with a disgruntled expression. "You just won't blame yourself," he continued. "Then, if something's really wrong, and she's not just calling, you'll pick up the phone. Come on." Emily looked down at the phone, the ringing stopped, and she exhaled shakily. But at the same moment, the call came again. There was a strange excitement inside that defied description. After hesitating for a few seconds, she decided to pick up the receiver. "Hello," she asked grudgingly, expecting to hear anything but what Mary would say in the next few seconds. "Joseph. He didn't survive our automobile accident. The funeral will be on Monday. Will you be able to make it, or won't you be expected?" Emily slowly slid to the floor. She expected to hear anything but that. Several minutes of complete silence passed before Brian looked out of the kitchen and was immediately stunned. His wife's face was as pale as a sheet, her eyes full of terror. He slowly approached her, looking into her eyes and asking with a tremor in his voice, "What's the matter? What did your stepmother say to you? What happened?" He crouched down beside her, trying somehow to figure out from the girl's look what had happened. "Daddy's gone" was the only thing the girl could whisper, and tears came to her eyes. She dropped her head to her knees, trying to suppress her sobs. Fear, pain, misunderstanding, and other negative feelings raged inside. Panic was rising more and more. It was getting harder to breathe with each passing second. Breaths were being taken. Circles appeared in my eyes. The funeral had gone smoothly. Emily didn't remember exactly what had happened, and the only moment she remembered was Mary, who was now confined to a wheelchair forever. It had been several months since the tragedy. Emily still hadn't fully recovered. She couldn't accept that her father was gone, that she would never be able to hold him again, to hear his voice. But as they say, trouble does not come alone. Emily's health took a serious hit. She was constantly visiting doctors, and sometimes even lay in hospitals for constant checkups. She lost a lot of weight, almost ceased to be happy about simple things, did not leave the house, and often cried. She literally wore herself out, not giving her body the slightest opportunity to recover from the tragedy. And she herself understood it perfectly well, but did not want to change anything. As time went on, the situation only got worse and worse. Emily thought it couldn't get any worse. After Emily's father died, her stepmother Mary said she needed her stepdaughter's help. She explained, "The doctors said I need constant care. I find it difficult to do simple household chores on my own, even cooking a meal. I don't have money for a caregiver. I understand that we had a bad relationship. You never loved me and didn't want your father to associate life with me. But since we've become related, we should help each other through a difficult situation." Brian expected Emily to react negatively, however she just nodded silently. She later told her husband, "I don't care. I'm just going to hire a caregiver for her. I hate her. I don't want to see or hear from her unnecessarily. I don't want to take care of the woman who ruined my father. She's not my family. I'll never be nice to her. I'd rather give my last dime to a caregiver. But I won't live in the same house with her. I don't care." Mary heard Emily's words but didn't object, realizing her stepdaughter wouldn't change her mind. It pained Brian to see his mother-in-law in need of help. He noticed that Mary looked at him carefully, and she thought his face looked familiar. As promised, Emily hired Mary a caregiver for her care and household chores. It wasn't cheap, so Emily took on extra work, staying late, doing what she could to pay the caregiver and have money for herself. This strain was taking a toll on Emily's health. She was losing her attractiveness and her health. Brian's entreaties to take on less work didn't work. Emily refused to help, seeing it as her area of responsibility. Over time, Emily's health deteriorated greatly. She constantly went to doctors, took tests, but no one could understand the cause. Doctors said that she was exhausting herself, not giving rest, and nervous tension leads to exhaustion. Brian looked at the doctor hopefully. "Isn't there anything that can be done? She's literally withering away, so young and she has no vitality at all. She looks exhausted and tired. Isn't there anything we can do to help her? Are we just going to leave her like this?" The doctor was silent for a while, then replied sadly, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. She is exhausting herself, and until she stops doing that, her condition will not improve. So you need to talk to your wife on your own. Explain to her how important this is, that she has to live for you, for your happy future. There's nothing I can do until your wife wants to live." Do you understand me? Brian walked out of the doctor's office depressed. He realized that nothing was going to work because Emily wouldn't listen to him. He had tried talking to her, urging her to eat better, sleep better, work less. But all these talks had no effect. He realized that his entreaties were useless, and there was no way out. Brian was not going to give up, so he decided to make one more attempt. "Honey, how about we go on vacation? There'll be lots of good food. We'll vacation together and spend some quality time together. We should do that, don't you think?" "I have to work. I can't go anywhere yet. I can't just take days off. I can't let my bosses down. If I don't, I won't get my bonus. And if I don't get the extra money, what's the point of my job? If I don't bring anything to our family?" Brian looked carefully into the girl's eyes and saw so much pain and despair in them that he felt uncomfortable. He took the girl's hands in his own, gently moved closer to her, and gazed into her eyes. "Please, Emily, for my sake. Let's take a vacation, relax, spend time together, and taste so many delicious things. It's been so long since we've been alone together, without work and worries and cares. Let's just be together. I'll pay for the caregiver, all your mother's expenses. Let's just be together." Emily looked at her husband with tired eyes. She didn't want to decide anything, didn't want to take part in any of these fights, didn't want anything from this life. The silence was becoming tense, and Brian realized that his wife's answer was obvious, but he hoped she would agree to spend some time with him. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to pass my responsibilities onto you. I promised my stepmother that I would provide her with a caregiver, and that responsibility is mine. You don't have to take over. We'll definitely spend time together when I get a promotion, or when I don't need a nurse. It just takes a little time." "Okay," Brian replied, realizing that his wife wasn't going to change her mind or agree to drop everything to spend time with him. But Brian and Emily were not destined to spend a single vacation together as husband and wife. One night the girl became very ill. The ambulance came quickly, but the doctors could not help in any way. Severely exhausted body almost did not fight for life. And a few days later, Brian received a call from the intensive care unit with sad news. Funeral arrangements were made quickly. Emily had never said where or how she wanted to be buried, but Brian was certain that she should be next to her father, that this was the place she rightfully belonged. He handled the arrangements entirely on his own, not allowing anyone to interfere with his advice and guidance. He knew how best to do things and understood perfectly well how things should be. He had buried a loved one before. But at the time of the last funeral, the last time he had seen his mother's lifeless face, he had thought he would never be hurt like that again. But Brian was wrong. This time the pain seemed dozens, if not hundreds of times worse. He wanted to scream, to cry, to be hysterical, but he held on with all his might. He knew that his tears wouldn't help, and probably would only hurt Emily's loved ones more. That day had left an indelible mark on his heart that he would never get rid of, that would always be with him, and that he would have to accept and learn to live with. He could not imagine that he had so little time to enjoy life with the one he loved. After the funeral, the tears flowed. He could not calm down, he could not pull himself together. So after the funeral was over, after breakfast, he came to his sick mother-in-law's bedroom to do what he had long dreamed of. He fell into her lap, shaking with sobs that he could no longer hide. Pain, resentment, longing, and frustration all blended into one emotion that would not let him go. He didn't want to live, didn't want to do anything else in this life. He felt like he was all alone again, a lost and unwanted boy who wandered the empty streets at night. "I remembered you at my husband's funeral," Mary said. "You looked at me like that." "But I didn't remember that look until later. You were the lost boy who needed support and advice. You're the Brian who couldn't recover from losing his mother and who didn't even want to live. You've grown so mature, so strong and beautiful. I knew you would become a beautiful man, but strong people need care and support sometimes too. Need someone to say a few affectionate words, to comfort them in misfortune and help them cope with the most intense sadness. It takes someone to support them, to stay by their side and sincerely believe that everything will be fine. And if you have no one else, if you yourself no longer believe that something else good is in store for you in the future, then I will do it in your place." Mary gently ran her hand through the man's hair, inviting him to share her sorrow and trying to convey in such a simple gesture all the love and care she felt in her soul. She wanted to share it with someone who really needed it. "Why me again? Why am I alone again? Why does fate have such sad plans for me? Why can't I just be happy? Can't help but lose the people I care about more than myself. Why can't I? I just can't be happy like all the people around me. And why things don't work out the way I want and desire. Why? Brian continued to lie on his mother-in-law's lap. Tears flowed silently down his cheeks. It seemed that he had already accepted the inevitability of his fate, that he no longer resisted it at all, and that he was ready to accept everything that was happening to him. But Mary was sure that it was not yet over. You know, for every major trial, fate sends you a gift, something you've wanted or needed for a long time, she said. She doesn't just send you trials, she tests you for resilience to thank you afterwards for all your suffering, for your perseverance and persistence, and for the fact that you don't just give up and go to the end. Now you will always have me. I will be there for you. I will support you in any situation, always help you with advice and deeds if you need it. I will help you to get out of this abyss, as I once helped you to cope with the darkness that surrounded you so quickly. I won't leave you alone. I'm not going to let you just give up. Just remember that you are not alone. The woman gently pressed the man to herself, trying to convey all her warmth and confidence that tomorrow would be better than today, and that in the near future everything would be much better than now. The next morning, all the neighbors were shocked that Brian had fired his mother-in-law's caregiver and started taking care of her on his own. He realized that he could not and did not want to stay alone, and that the best solution would be to spend his life with the person who would really help in a difficult moment, who would be there for him, who would support and help with advice, and who would not betray and would not leave in a difficult situation. Brian didn't just start doing all the household chores on his own. He also worked hard on his mother-in-law's health. He wanted to make sure that her life was safe and that she would be able to live many more happy years, even if she was confined to a wheelchair. In the meantime, the doctors were giving a good prognosis, and that made the guy feel much calmer. He was able to calm down a little and began to try to live on. Now, not only without his mother, with whom he once parted not on the most pleasant note, but also without his favorite woman, for whose sake he was ready for a lot, but could not do anything to convince her to live on. Perhaps there was a reward ahead of him for such a serious ordeal, but maybe it was just an experience that he will just have to accept and move on with his life.